I'll have Bill III address revenues, but just at a very high level, yes, I would anticipate seeing payroll go down because of these investments.
That was John Mozeliak leading into the offseason talking about what the Cardinals' plans are when it comes to their payroll.
Was that PC 1, 2, 3, or 4?
I think that was 1. That was when he was up there with DeWitt the third and DeWitt Jr. Because remember, one of them had said something along the lines of like, we're not really sure about our revenues, which will impact our payroll.
Oh, yeah, that was
and then
Junior.
Mo stepped in and Mo said, I want to go ahead and jump in here real quick. I'll let Bill DeWitt the third get in on this,
yeah,
but I want you guys to know, yes, payroll is going to go down
And
this
then
year.
and then Junior did the old Harry Houdini, and he just dropped the smoke bomb. He's like, gone. What happened?
You can't see me. I'm here, but you can't see me. Luca did that earlier today. He went into Kara's closet, hid in there behind the clothes, and was like, you guys can't see me. I can't get changed this morning.
Oh, that's always fun when they play hide and seek, and you don't know where they went to hide. And it's like, cool, did my kid just run out of the house?
Kara had one of those moments yesterday. The closet is his new spot, right? Gets that from me. And he decided, I'm going to go ahead and hide in here. And Kara lost track of him for a second.
Lose her mind?
She legitimately almost had a heart attack. But anyway, so the Cardinals might be giving a lot of Cardinals fans a heart attack right now.
High
because they're going into arbitration day. And earlier this morning, if you were on Twitter, you saw John Denton tweet out something that was basically along the lines of, I'm summing this up, hey, Brendan Donovan is on track to get a contract similar to what Tommy Edman got last year. To buy out his arbitration years, give the player some certainty, give the Cardinals cost control. They will know what he's going to make in future years. Don't have to go through this arbitration nonsense anymore with him. Seems like a pretty nice way to go about it with one of the guys that you want to see as a stalwart during this reset of the retool, right? Well, then, about 2 hours later, John Denton sends out the following. A multi-year deal for Cardinals infielder Brendan Donovan is unlikely to materialize before today's 12 p.m. Central deadline. Talks have been, quote, minimal, end quote, between St. Louis and Donovan, who had hoped for long-term security. A deal for 25 on an arbitration hearing, are more likely. Okay.
That's the way you build a good relationship, a good culture, a good family.
So that was one report on what the Cardinals are going to do today. Another was this on Jojo Romero. Jojo Romero and Ryan Helsley's futures are uncertain. Romero could be facing an arbitration case if he and St. Louis can't agree to a deal before the 12 p.m. deadline. Continuing on, Ryan Helsley said that this one could get a little bit more contentious. He is projected to make $8.25 million in 2025, but his representative team is asking for $9 to $10 million, according to John Denton's source, which obviously the Cardinals just could not do because that's an extra $1 million, and they are cash strapped right now, given what
Thanks a lot, Nolan.
The TV deal looks like, and their ticket sales are projecting for in 2025. Wonder why those could be down.
I blame Arenado.
There's that too. And then there's the Lars Nootbaar side of things. The Cardinals have been working towards a multi-year deal, according to John Denton, with Lars Nootbaar, but have been unable to come to terms with him. He's expected to sign a deal for 2025 and return to the bargaining table in 2026 after potentially posting better power numbers. All right, so that's where we're at. Going into today's deadline, when the Cardinals have to decide what to do with all of these arbitration-eligible players, they basically appear to have nothing done.
It's a good thing to do when you're on crunch time.
And it sure sounds like the relievers are likely to head to arbitration, which we know is a nasty process, dude. It does not tend to go well, and very rarely do Cardinals players go to arbitration and then re-sign with the club because of how nasty it ends up getting. We've seen this with Ryan Helsley and with Jack Flaherty. It gets so nasty that it seems to kind of drag into the season where there's a little bit of bitter taste in the mouth between the player and the organization. Alex, what do you make of this? Are you surprised at all, especially with the Donovan side of things, that he wants a long-term deal, it sounds like, and they're kind of wishy-washy on? What do you make of all of this?
I mean, it's not good it's not good vibes for a Cardinals team, that's for sure, that's trying to figure out what they've got in these younger players, specifically the Brendan Donovan. I mean, can you blame a Brendan Donovan who wanted a little bit of security for a Cardinals team that just hands out security like Oprah Winfrey hands out car keys? Like, I mean, the Cardinals over the last 5 years have been like, you get an extension, and you get one. And now Brendan Donovan's like, hey, I literally played half of a season with one arm for you guys.
That's true.
And I just would like a little security.
That's not worth an extra $1 million.
And the Cardinals say, yeah, but you weren't very good for us, and we don't want to pay you that extra $1 million or give that long-term deal. Like, I think the Brendan Donovan one is a lot more alarming than the bullpen arms. The bullpen arms is going to get ugly.
So I will say this. If Donovan's going to agree to a deal before the arbitration process is done, he could do exactly what Tommy Edman did last year, which is figure this thing out right now. And
get traded.
Actually, Edman literally did not agree to a deal. And then before the arbitration hearings, they agreed to the multi-year extension. So it's still possible. Today's not like a deadline for the extension stuff. It's just a deadline to come to terms prior to arbitration.
And then they set the arbitration date. And then you try and get the deal done before then.
Correct. So I wouldn't freak out too much just yet. Deadlines make deals. And this is not truly a deadline for the extension. The arbitration stuff is interesting to me, man.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just off of past occurrences, like I can reference Doug Armstrong and the arbitrations that have gone through that he's been in, it gets ugly, and those players don't typically stay around very long afterwards. So I'll be really curious because there's no leverage for the Cardinals in these arbitration hearings if they get to them with Ryan Helsley and JoJo Romero. Like, those two dudes were everything for you last season, and the Cardinals typically in these arbitrations, you make things ugly so that you don't have to pay them the money. That's not a good relationship to start a season where you're going to be needing them.
Helsley's the one I really don't understand. Like, it's $1 million, man. Just lock it in. Why are we going to arbitration with a guy that you have decided to keep? Like, that's your choice. You could have just traded him to avoid all of
deadline.
this.
Just till the deadline.
I guess. Like, you
just trade him.
If your plan is to wait until the deadline to deal him, and you're planning to deal him at the deadline, get this done for an extra $1 million so you get the best version of Ryan Helsley. Because if you don't get the best version of Ryan Helsley this season, guess what? You ain't getting that same return at the deadline as you would right now. I've been on favor of them waiting until then because I do think it's likely they will get more at the deadline if he's healthy and performing well than they will during the offseason. The desperation mode for especially contenders just rises as you get closer to the deadline and they look around and see, oh, there's very few options available as opposed to right now where they can go to free agency, go to other teams and get a closer. That same availability, not there at the trade deadline. So I think it makes some sense the way they're handling it. Not this, though. Dude, get a deal done. It's $1 million. If you are truly so cash strapped that you need $1 million, like you cannot possibly give Ryan Helsley that extra $1 million for good faith, like you got bigger problems right now. Seriously. The one with JoJo Romero, like what are we talking about? Like 1.5 versus $2 million or something like that? It can't be a massive difference between the two sides. What are we doing there? The arbitration process in general for players is crazy to me. And the idea that these teams are going to file or are going to trial over a few $100,000 is insane. You could potentially ruin these relationships with players, especially JoJo Romero, who's going to be here for another season potentially. And again, if you plan to deal him at the deadline, you need the best possible version of him prior to the deadline to be able to do so. I don't understand why you're going down this path. Now with John King, whatever. Like that feels like a different,
poor John King.
Little different to me.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, I see what the Cardinals' leverage would be with John King.
Well, I get their leverage with JoJo.
He did not have a great year either.
Yeah.
But again, he's got a future here potentially.
Let me tell you the side of the Cardinals, okay?
Hold on, JoJo didn't have a good year for them?
No, not in the second half.
I mean, the first half, he was probably one of the most...
was down, and he wasn't as dominant as he was a year ago. That would be the way that I would describe it. I think he was fine. He was a good reliever.
And that's how they'll sell it to the arbitrator, and that's how they'll probably win the case against him.
They ain't winning that case against Ryan Helsley.
No, I don't know what their argument is against Helsley. Outside of like, well, you didn't go multiple innings. Well, wait a minute. In the last arbitration hearing, I was told I wasn't durable enough. So we decided to go on one-inning stretches.
Also, the best closers in baseball are going one-inning stretches as well. So why would, look at what Hader just got in free agency a year ago. He never went back-to-back days and never went multiple innings. So get out of here with that nonsense, Cardinals.
Yeah, the way that the Cardinals are going to, whether it is sell this or convince themselves, or they have convinced themselves of this penny pinching, is because they are at least open. I don't know if open-minded is the right word, but at least have the idea now in their mind of, hey, what if we can't move on from Arenado? sure, it is an extra couple $100,000 for a JoJo. Maybe there's a couple extra $100,000 for whether it be a Donovan or a King or a Ryan Helsley. It could be $1 million is their difference. Well, all of that suddenly starts to add up, and when it gets a lot harder to cut what clearly is about, what, $20 to $30 million off of payroll still is what they have to do.
I think that's where they're at right now.
It gets
from last year.
Yeah, it gets tough to what they have to try and do if they have to now pivot towards their pitchers that they have to move on from, right? Because it's a little harder to get to that equation while also fielding a competitive team.
But they're already at $30 million. Like, how much are they going to have to cut from last year's payroll?
Well, that's what I'm saying. They still apparently have to cut $20 to $30 million. Otherwise, Arenado's not on the conversation.
They're already down 30.
Yeah, I know. This was my whole argument earlier in the year.
What I don't understand is they must have been hemorrhaging money, dude. That's the only way that I can understand where we're at right now. And listen, I'm open to like me just being completely wrong about all of this stuff, and it appears really, really cash strapped, but this is an organization that in the past has been pretty competitive with their year in, year out payrolls. Like they've been around $170 to $195 million on their payroll for like 5 or 6 years now. It's kind of the range that they've been in. I don't think they just did that willy-nilly. This is not an organization that spins the way that the Padres do, for example. They don't end up in the red every year. At least I wouldn't think. I can't imagine that that's the way they've been operating, but maybe, I suppose. I don't think they're deficit spending out there, though. They went from that to this year right now being projected at $145 to $150 million. And if you get Arenado's money off of the books, you're looking at like $125 million. Are they really going to have to reduce $50 to $70 million from their payroll? Is that what we're talking about here?
I don't know about you, but that seems a little fresh to me if they do that.
Whew.
That's
tough sell.
Why else do you go from, okay, we have to trade Nolan Arenado to, okay, well, if we don't trade Nolan Arenado, we then have to trade Fedde and Matz. Like that's not a well, we got to choose between these two. That's a, hey, we have to cut payroll.
I guess they're saying they have to cut $20 million. They got to be at $125 million this year, which puts them roughly in line with what the Colorado Rockies are spending. Just to put that in perspective, that would be roughly 20th in Major League Baseball. Do we really?
Go ahead.
That is a hard sell for me to believe that the St. Louis Cardinals are going to have roughly the same revenues this upcoming season as the Colorado Rockies and the Kansas City Royals, because that would be where their spending is. That seems hard to me. Maybe I'm wrong. That feels like it's a hard sell for me to believe that that's where they're going to be in their payroll. All right. He's Alex Ferrario. That's Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Coming up in about 15 minutes or so, we'll talk to Joey Vitale, Blues analyst for 101 ESPN and FanDuel Sports Midwest, out of the Blues versus the Ducks matchup tonight, which you will hear right here on your home of the Blues, 101 ESPN. By the way, a little bit of an update on that game tonight. Joel Hofer expected to be in net. He was the first goalie off the ice earlier today, so the Blues going back and forth, swapping their goalies out to see what sticks for them. Hopefully, eventually, they're going to get a good start out of one of those two. We'll talk about that more with Joey Vitale. We'll talk about it as well with Dave Reid, NHL Network analyst. That's all coming up later on in the show today. You guys can get involved in the show at 314-399-9646. That is the Air Comfort Service text line. YouTube is available for you as well at youtube.com/101ESPN STL. The studio cams are powered by the Air Alliance team. Coming up next, Notre Dame is the most likable team that remains in the college football playoff, according to some polls that have recently been done. How the hell did that happen? We'll talk about it here on 101 ESPN. Alongside Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. You got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Joey Vitale joining us here in just about 10 minutes or so. So Notre Dame has apparently become the most likable team that remains in the college football playoff, which is a wild place for me to be as a college football fan. Never in my life did I think, you know who was going to be like America's team? Notre Dame.
That sounds about right.
The plucky underdog from South Bend that had
Irish.
a movie made out of them because they're one of the most historically prominent college football programs. That is the team that has become this year's lovable underdog. So there was a poll recently that went out, Alex, and they asked fans from every state, which team are you rooting for? And Alex, this, not to get political, this looks like the most recent electoral map.
Oh, wow.
It's
You didn't even have
all
to go
Notre
there.
Dame. It's
Come on,
all
man.
Notre Dame. Everybody clicked for Notre Dame as the team that they're going to be rooting for in this year's college football playoff. It's crazy. There's one state that had Ohio State. Can you guess which one that would be?
I'm going to go with Ohio.
Texas.
Yeah, Ohio. There are 4 states that are interested in Texas being the national champion this year. Texas being one of them.
Smart by them.
And then randomly Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama.
Georgia said, well, those teams just said, well, if no SEC teams in, we just got to root for the SEC
Sure.
teams.
I guess that's what that would
Tired of
be.
you ripping on our conference.
And then there's a few different states that are interested in Penn State being the team. One is Michigan, because, of course, anybody but Ohio State. And then Pennsylvania, looks like Maryland,
All
New
those
Jersey,
top East
a couple
Coast teams
other-
that, real tiny. You
Yeah.
forget about them. Rhode Island, probably.
Alex, what do you... Oh, and Alaska. Alaska's
That
for
makes
Penn State.
That
naturally.
makes a lot of... It's got to be where James Franklin's from, I would imagine.
I guess. I don't know. What do you make of this, Alex? Why is Notre Dame the team that... the vast majority of America appears to be rooting for this year in the college football playoff.
In my opinion, it's likability of the coach. I think Marcus Freeman, a lot of people have latched onto and think he's just a stand-up guy. They're successful. He's likable. Ryan Day is the polar opposite of that. Steve Sarkisian is the polar opposite of that. I actually thought James Franklin was kind of likable, but apparently college football really does not like him because he's just not competitive in games that matter. I think Marcus Freeman is this new and shiny toy that you really haven't talked a lot about because Notre Dame was bad last year, and now they're good, and you don't have to keep talking about the Ohio States, the Texas, the same teams over and over. And frankly, I think people are just sick of seeing some of the faces of these other coaches.
Yeah, I think the one that I can't understand is Penn State, because I can get how you get to the spot with Texas and Ohio State.
Sure.
Definitely Ohio State, because it feels like they're always in this conversation.
And nobody likes Ryan Day. Everybody hates Ryan
Yeah,
Day.
and
I think
Texas.
Ryan Day might hate Ryan Day.
And Texas has moved into this conversation under Stark as always recruiting well, always being in the spotlight, always fielding a competitive team. The Penn State one I don't get, but I do think it is likability with Marcus Freeman. And I also wonder, the more I've thought about this, I kind of had this thought in the office. I don't know if it plays because Penn State and Ohio State stayed in their conference, but I wonder if it is some kind of the conference realignment and hating the Power Four conferences. And you've got Notre Dame as this independent team that does their own thing, and they found a way into the college football playoff without being in one of those power conferences that are clearly money-hungry conferences. I wonder if some of that plays into this with the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, but I think most of it is just, hey, Marcus Freeman seems like a likable head coach, and people can get behind that guy, and you haven't really seen Notre Dame in the playoff before, right? You haven't, or recently. They haven't been a team that's been national conversations lately. Penn State's always been there in the
They
Big
just
Ten.
in it like 3 years ago?
I don't
Notre
think-
Dame, wasn't it, with
Brian Kelly?
Brian
though.
Kelly?
Yeah.
But I think now it's like a new era with the Freeman era, and
Sure.
they've been kind of a team that's been outside the national headlines until this season. That would be kind of my thought process with it.
Yeah, I think it's about hate for the other teams. I can't understand the hate towards Penn State. That's the one that... Let me clarify. I can't understand the hate for modern version of Penn State.
Yeah.
I think some of this is, okay, Texas is Texas. They've been throwing their weight around in college football for years, right? They're the reason that Missouri is no longer in the Big 12. The reason the Big 12 dissolved is because of Texas. So they're the big dogs, and nobody that is outside of Texas likes Texas. Ohio State, basically the same thing. If you're not an Ohio State fan, you probably hate Ohio State because of their national prominence, and frankly, Ryan Day is super unlikable. So that makes sense to me. I thought Notre Dame would be in that same bucket. as an Ohio State because of their national prominence, because of their history of success. But I do think there's something to the fact that Marcus Freeman is super likable. And then Penn State, I think it goes back to the Paterno era. Like, I think people just, when you do the word association game, right?
Just when you see the logo, yeah.
Penn State, Paterno. And that is not something that you want to be associated with. And unfortunately, they are. Like, there's no getting away from that, even though it's been almost, 20 years now since that era. But, hey, man, you're still associated with it. So I think it's just process of elimination. I'm not rooting for Texas. I'm not rooting for Ohio State. I hate what happened at Penn State. I'll go with Notre Dame. That's going to be my squad. I don't have a reason specifically to hate them. I watched Rudy going up. Good movie. I'll go with Notre Dame. That's my squad in this one.
Yikes. Well, Rudy's the reason why we're big Notre Dame fans.
I don't even know
Hot
that movie.
take. I didn't like Rudy.
I've never seen
Okay.
it.
Definitely not a true story.
It's what?
Yeah,
Spoiler.
Turns out all of it was a scam.
By the way, my daughter says spoiler now, so when she watches Elsa, she says, "Daddy, Elsa's gonna freeze the city." Spoiler. I'm like, cool, thanks. I've watched this 115 times already today. Like the rooting against, for me, starts at Ohio State. Like, I just don't like Ryan Day, and I don't like Will Howard, and I don't know why I don't like those two, but I just don't. I judge books by their cover. And so Ohio State, like, I'm rooting against them. Texas, I'm rooting against them because of the Big 12 thing. I don't have any, like, hatred towards Penn State. Like, yeah, past, obviously, you think of it, but James Franklin's a different individual. It just seems like I gravitate more towards Marcus Freeman, and I don't know why. I really think it's something about the head coach that people are like, I just like this guy.
They also have a prominent player from St. Louis. So, like, for us here in St. Louis, I can see why people would be rooting for them with love. But, yeah, it's just, they're the team that people are gravitating towards for whatever reason. Somebody on the text line mentioned, one, they're not a state school. Two, they're a national school. And two, the Catholic tie-in. Like, there's something there, too, as well, for sure. That's part of why Rudy became such a big deal. Is because they have a national audience.
Kyron Williams was on these Notre Dame guy, St. Louis. I'm just rooting for the St. Louis kids,
That's right.
That's where it's at.
I'm not sure how Kyron Williams applies, considering he's been in the NFL now for like 3 years.
No,
But sure.
Notre Dame guy. I just had to connect when you said that the Notre Dame kid was St. Louis. I'm like, didn't they have another St. Louis kid?
Both
Kyron Williams.
backs.
There you go. See?
He's Alex Ferrario.
St. Louis.
That is Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kyler. Who you guys got tonight? Notre Dame versus Penn State. It's a 1-point line. T-Bone, you said that Notre Dame's got a flu outbreak in their
What kind of flu, though? This is an important follow-up. Is it the upstairs or the downstairs?
I don't know about that, but it's a bad flu outbreak, apparently. Now, apparently it's only affecting backups and special teamers, but,
what I know about the flu is it definitely never transmits across the locker room.
What did the flu not get to the talented players? Like, what are we saying here? Oh, it's just the backups. The backups are gone. We're good.
Mark Freeman is such a good coach that he was like, no,
you can't touch our star quarterback.
Not Riley Leonard, not Love.
He's just in the locker room just swatting down the flu bug.
He's like putting the third stringers in front of the... He's like creating a barrier.
Build a wall.
Meanwhile, their starting offensive line are all in the bathroom right now with the flu. Just explosive diarrhea. But no, you can't get to us.
Who you guys got tonight?
I got Notre Dame.
I got Penn State. I don't think Notre Dame's going to be able to put up the points.
I've gone back and forth on this one a million different times. I think ultimately I'm going to go with Penn State. Drew Aller, I think there's a decent chance Drew Aller ends up declaring for the draft, guys. I do. I think he has a big-time college football playoff. He looks at this year's college football class that's heading to the NFL and says, dude, I'm better than all of those dudes. And I think he ends up going in the top 10.
And
Drew
then
Aller,
Penn State loses
quarterback.
Both of their quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Golly, that would be great.
I think Mizzou fans will freak out about Prabula potentially entering the portal, and I don't think they should. I think he got a pretty good bag from Mizzou, and I don't think he's heading back to Penn State.
I bet it's bigger at Penn State.
Especially if they lose Aller.
Yeah.
If they lose Aller, it would have been a real big.
Coming up next, Joey Vitale, Blues analyst for 101 ESPN.
Tanner Hendrickson here, the Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Blues back in action tonight as they host the Anaheim Ducks. We'll have pregame coverage starting at 6 o'clock with Alex Ferrario and Joey Vitale. Then Joey will join Chris Carver for puck drop at 7. In the college football playoff semifinals tonight, Penn State takes on Notre Dame with kickoff at 6:30 in the Capital One Orange Bowl. This Sports Center update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See him at Londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Alongside Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Happy to go out to the 101 ESPN hotline, the Callier and Thompson hotline to be specific, to be joined by Joey Vitale, our friend, the Blues analyst for 101 ESPN, and of course, FanDuel Sports Midwest. Joe, appreciate the time as always, man. How you doing today?
Joey! You finally back home from sad.
What's up, boys? What's going on? Loving it right now. How you doing?
Doing very well. So we'll get to the Blues here in just a moment, Joe. I want to get your thoughts on that. But the college football playoff begins tonight. Notre Dame is in it. They have a proud CBC member with Jeremiah Love on their roster. They are a Catholic university as well. I would imagine they at least have some kind of pull to your heart in that regard. Are you rooting for Notre Dame like the rest of the country appears to be?
Nah, I hate Notre Dame. Not a fan. Not a fan. Not a fan. You know what I hate about Notre Dame? Everyone, if you know, hey, my second uncle's cousin went to Notre Dame, then they're a Notre Dame fan, apparently. Get a life, everybody. Get a life. Sorry, too honest.
So are you Penn State, Ohio State, or Texas in this one? Those are your 4 options. You hate Notre Dame, so you got 3 left.
Yeah, I just don't want Notre Dame to win. I just don't want Notre Dame to win. That's it. No, obviously, I'm a little bit peeved by the fan base and how everyone wants to be an Irishman or whatever, and maybe that's my Italian heartstrings just
I respect that.
going crazy. We need an Italian Catholic college to really step up to the plate here. Maybe then I'd feel a little bit better. But
Joe, let's start it. Let's start it together, man.
I feel like it's just Rutgers.
Is that an Italian Catholic college?
Basically, it's New Jersey.
It might be the closest thing we got.
You're gonna have fist pumping
Shiano is their head coach. I feel like.
Fist pumping 101, Joe.
That's right. We'll get instead of an Irish sleep, we'll get a little loaf of bread. On all the jerseys, and we'll have like a little
can of olive oil. Pouring some of it over the bread.
The mascot instead of the Irishman, little leprechaun guy, it'll be a little Italian guy holding like an olive brand. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
I think it should just be a bottle of olive oil, Joe. That's what the mascot is.
It's like the Pop-Tart bowl, but with olive oil instead.
Totally.
That's all.
Olive oil races.
All right, Joe, let's get to the Blues. They're back in action tonight against the Anaheim Ducks, a key important part of the schedule, as we talked about last week with you. They're going with Ville Husso. I almost did it again.
What is
They're
wrong
going
with you two?
Over in this one against Anaheim over Jordan Bennington. What do you make of the decision, Joe? You surprised by it at all?
I wasn't, and I got to tell Alex, I told you so, Alex.
You told me. You did.
We were talking about this in the post game the other day, and just watching both these goalies, and you look at how I think they both in the last couple games have let goals in they'd like to have back. Jim Montgomery did acknowledge them both this morning at the press conference I was at, saying, you know what, yeah, they've maybe want one or two of those back, but at the same time, defensively, we've been allowing way too many east-west opportunities, passes through the seam, through the middle of the ice, where we're making our goaltender really stretch out to make saves. You look at that goal there by Matt Boldy a few days ago in the Minnesota Wild game, of course, ended up becoming the game-winning goal in the third period. It's a turnover by Broberg, his stick breaks, but it's that pass, 3-on-1 across the middle of the ice, and Boldy just buries it. Too many opportunities like that. So it's a little bit of goalie, but a lot of it comes down to this team and playing better in front of them. But to the decision of tonight, the biggest thing I noticed and why I think they're going this way, and Alex and I were talking about it, a lot of it is goaltender to opposition matchups. How does a goaltender typically fare recently against a certain opposition? And I just think in that Columbus game a couple games ago, Joel Hofer, to me, was just a little bit too leaky. I think that he wanted some of those goals back, and you just don't want that getting into the psyche of Joel, and certainly you don't want it to give confidence to the opposition. So with the Blues playing the Blue Jackets on Saturday, They end up not going with Hofer for that one. They're going to switch you up to Bennington, which, of course, that means Hofer gets the game tonight against the Anaheim Ducks, who by the way, he's fared very well against in his career.
Joe, speaking of that defensive side of it, I mean, there's just some plays that you looked at, whether it was the Columbus game or that Minnesota game, and you're like, man, they weren't doing that about a week ago. What do you think kind of leaked into their game over those last two?
I think it's just the type of game that they're used to. It's interesting. I was talking to a coach this morning, and he talked about how these players and us as humans we're basically built around certain habits, right? We do things relatively consistently. That's why, I think it was Aristotle who said, you are what you repeatedly do, because the habits have a history of creeping back into your game. Okay, so what I see, Alex, is, you have a new coach come in, and you see this a lot. You see how a team can have success right away. Whether it be now Detroit with Todd McClellan, we'll see how this thing develops. But Jim Montgomery, heck, even last year with Drew Bannister, every time there's a coaching change, it's amazing how quickly teams go on these runs. And to kind of break it down into, I think, the systematic way of reasoning for that is because, a coach comes in, you get new energy, you start creating new habits in players, you start implementing new things, and the players are like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And then, of course, you have success because of that. But what happens over time is, as individuals, we tend to fall back onto those old habits, and that's where I think that, you see even big picture teams at the beginning of the season. Sometimes the top teams in the league have slow starts. But what's the old saying is cream eventually comes to the top because those teams with the good players and good habits will always find a way at the end. And I think that right now for this team, you're looking at a team that, of course, found some Jim Montgomery success early on, but now they're kind of starting to flirt a little bit with these old habits that have been in their game for the last couple seasons. And this is where it's up to Jim Montgomery to recognize it and say, no way, guys, not going to happen. We're not going to circle. We're not going to keep our sticks over here. We're going to put our sticks in good position. We're going to keep a high guy. We're not going to go back to the old ways. This is a new way, and this is a new style, and this is going to be a new team, and we're going to have success in this new way, whether you like it or not.
All right, I'm going to take a hard right turn with Joey Vitale, one of the great analysts in the country, and he does really good stuff on national topics along with just breaking down the St. Louis Blues. Joe, you've had some breadcrumbs for us in recent years, and you have more insight than sometimes you lead on.
He's the bread man, so.
I am curious. There's a big story going on in the NHL with the Vancouver Canucks and what is going to happen in the future with JT Miller and Elias Pettersson. What do you think happens there, Joe? Those are two of the best in the game, especially with Pettersson. What do you think ends up being the future of those two in Vancouver?
I think that they're not going to stay together. I don't think you can. I think that it's been such a distraction. I've heard rumblings of certain personality traits out of both. I'm not going to get into details,
sure,
but I think that it's an oil and vinegar relationship not because they're bad people, just because I think they are so different in their approach. And I think that when you are an organization that has that as your top players, and then once the news starts to get out there, and then obviously the national news starts to grab onto it, especially in a huge market like Canada, I think really there's only one way to move on from it, and that is to move on from it. Now the Vancouver Canucks have got to make a decision. Who is their future? Who is more of a pillar as far as where they're building and what they want to build towards? Is it a player like JT Miller who plays a pretty strict 200-foot game, physical, likes to agitate, great personality, amazing character? Or is it more of a skilled player like Elias Pettersson, maybe a little bit more quiet, maybe a little bit more tough around the edges for some people, the way he plays and kind of his quiet approach to things. But it really comes down to that, BK. And I can't tell you who. My guess, and this is just a hunch, would be that they end up moving on from JT Miller here relatively quickly because this is a Vancouver Canucks team that's had a lot of success under Rick Tocchet. Starting a little bit, they're in a decent spot. In fact, the Blues are chasing them now. But if this thing continues to spiral out of control like it has, I think it's got to be sooner rather than later. And for JT Miller, there's a lot of suitors out there who would gladly take a player like that.
Joe, just from a personal standpoint, I'm sure you've seen this before where two guys don't get along in a locker room. How does a team handle that around them? Because if you're competitive and you expect to be competitive and your two best players dislike each other, how do you go about managing that season?
That's the thing. It's the two best players, not just two guys on the roster.
They're your leaders.
These are the two leaders.
that's where it's tricky, because I've been on teams, guys, where, you have a couple players who have their quarrels, or you have a couple players. But what do they do? I mean, listen, you're professional, right? You keep your distance. You don't have to go to dinner. It's the old saying in any sports, and certainly in the sport of hockey, I've heard many times coaches come in and say, hey, we don't need to be best buddies. We don't need to hold hands and sing kumbaya every road trip. But we do need to get along. We do have to respect each other and respect the fact that we're both pulling the same rope in the same direction. And I've always found, on all my teammates and every team I've been on, that players can separate that. They can separate, okay, I'm not a fan of this person, but he is my teammate, and this is the way things are, and I'm not going to certainly complain about it. This is a whole different thing with Vancouver Canucks because for multiple reasons. And like you said, the biggest one being these are your two-star players outside of Quinn Hughes. That's the three-headed monster in Vancouver right now. So two of the three-headed monster are having the issues, and it's in a huge Canadian market where obviously they've grabbed it, and they're not going to let go. They're not letting either of these players off the hook until I think something either happens with one of them being moved, or the team just is a good distraction in the sense that they start winning. But if they keep playing, 500 hockey, they start losing, it's just something that's never going to go away. And listen, I'm not in public relations, certainly, but I've always found that when things like this happen with two players, it only ends one way, and that's when someone leaves, and then you have to start a whole new direction.
Joe, we appreciate the time as always, man. Looking forward to hearing you and Curbs on the call tonight. Pre-game with Alex begins at 6 o'clock. Blues versus Ducks on your home of the Blues, 101 ESPN. All the best to you, Joe. We'll talk with you again next week, my friend.
Hey, sounds good, fellas. You guys have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
See you, Joey. Same to you. That's Joey Vitale joining us as he does each and every Thursday here on BK and Ferrario. That's an interesting situation for the Vancouver Canucks, Alex. I said yesterday, if you have to split these guys up, the last thing that I'm doing is trading Elias Pettersson. I'm just unwilling to do that. That's a 26-year-old, 100-point player, plays the center position, and maybe he's not as good defensively. Maybe he has a little bit more of a prickly personality than what some would prefer, but that's the dude I'm building around, not JT Miller, who's 31 years old and potentially on the back end of his prime.
Yeah, I'm the same way. When they drafted Elias Pettersson, the Sedin brothers, who were heroes in that city, they were the ones working with him on a daily basis. They were a part of the team that said, this is the guy you need to select. That's the golden child for the Vancouver Canucks. You don't trade that away. And I mean, look, me personally, if a guy has been on 3 different teams in his tenure, I'm thinking, okay, what's going on here? Because
also, it's not just 3 random teams. It's the Rangers, who prior to this year were well run.
Yep.
Tampa Bay Lightning, who are one of probably over the last decade, the best organization.
And remember, he was not with Tampa when they won a Stanley Cup. He was traded away from Tampa the year before Tampa won their first Stanley Cup.
Interesting.
And then he goes to Vancouver, and he's been in the playoffs twice with Vancouver. And Vancouver's had a pretty good roster since JT Miller's been there. And also, mind you, look at the deal that was traded to Tampa for JT Miller. It was a prospect that wasn't a high-level prospect, a third-round pick and a first-round pick.
And at that time, he was a third-line player. He broke out in Vancouver, became what he is today, which is a point-per-game plus type of a performer and a 200-foot player. Really good player, but I would hitch my wagon to Elias Pettersson, even if the personality is a little bit more on the prickly side of things. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. You got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Katie Wu, Cardinals insider for The Athletic, is going to join us in just over 10 minutes, so be sure to tune in for that. Tell all your friends. Katie Wu joins us in about 10 minutes to talk about the latest with Nolan Arenado, what she's hearing on that front, and what is she expecting from the Cardinals prior to today's tender deadline for arbitration processes? We'll get into that with Katie at 12 o'clock. Questions and answers coming up next here on 101 ESPN. All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. The YouTube chat is available for you at youtube.com/101ESPN STL. If you guys have any questions, you can get them in over there as well. From the 314, and this has been asked about 4 different ways by 4 different people, Alex. What would it take for the Blues to trade for Elias Pettersson if they wanted to get into that mix?
I think your starting point is Thomas or Kyrou.
So Kyrou.
Anaheim is going to say Thomas because they're giving up a center. They're going to want a center back. So it's one of those two. And you're probably talking about a younger, established NHL player. So probably a Bolduc or a Neighbors, and then a draft pick. The thing with because like I've looked back at history of like trading a guy who's had a 100-point season. And like most recently, it's Matthew Tkachuk. But Matthew Tkachuk didn't have a contract already locked up. But he still got Jonathan Huberdeau was coming off of a 100-point season. Mackenzie Weegar, who was the top pair defenseman, and they got a first-round draft pick on top of it. So this one's going to be tough. Vancouver believes they can win. And if you're trading Pettersson, it's got to make them better than what they were with Pettersson. So I think probably a lot of people would say Kyrou, Bolduc, and a first-round pick. I think if I'm Vancouver, I'm saying no, Thomas Broberg and a first-round pick.
Yeah, and if you're the Blues, you say, okay, thank you. Yeah. We'll talk to you later.
But that's the haul, and that's the hard part with them trying to trade Vancouver. The difference is if they try to trade Vancouver, if they try and trade Pettersson, you got 31 teams that are calling about it because he doesn't have a no movement clause until July 1st, so you could trade him anywhere. JT Miller's going to tell you where he's going. So you get a massive return for Pettersson, but it's probably not going to match what a 100-point 26-year-old centerman is. And you kind of get screwed over for the JT Miller trade because he's going where he wants to go.
A little something.
Maybe. I mean, like I think Friedman was reporting it. The Rangers really wanted him, and they offered up Mika Zibanejad for JT Miller. I mean, if I'm Vancouver, I would have done that. But it sounds like the Rangers said nope, or the Vancouver said no, we're not doing that. So.
That's interesting. Would you hold out hope, like in this scenario you just presented? Let's say Vancouver's willing to do it, but they say we want Kyrou, Bolduc, Lindstein,
probably if they want to,
and a first-round pick. That's the
for
deal.
Pettersson.
For Pettersson. If you're in Doug Armstrong's shoes, is that what you decide to do? You push all of your chips in for Pettersson, or are you waiting to see what emerges, what you can shake from the tree this offseason?
I would do that now, if that's the deal that gets it done. Now, I don't know.
What if I switched out Neighbors for Bolduc?
Then I wouldn't do that. I would hold out hope and see what else is out there. I'm Neighbors
is a ton to give up either way.
Yeah. Neighbors is a core piece, and I know people are probably like, I'd give up Neighbors before Bolduc. Bolduc's got the offense, but Neighbors is just a difference maker in my opinion. The reason I wouldn't hold out and hope what happens, because I'm sure a lot of people would say, well, hold out for Brady Tkachuk. Ottawa makes the playoffs. Brady ain't going anywhere because then he feels like they've got something. I wouldn't hold out because that's a 26-year-old 100-point player that's locked up until he's like 34 years old. Those guys don't come around very often. I don't know the personality side of him. Maybe he's a problem, and I'd have to figure that out. But if I know that he would fit into my team, which he's Swedish, I mean, why wouldn't he, right? Steiner loves those guys. I would pull the trigger on that deal now because it makes me better right now.
Would you do it, T-Bone?
Yeah, I would. And I'd do it if Neighbors was involved in it. And that's not anything against Neighbors. Neighbors isn't a center that
really
gets 100 points.
severely lacking wingers in that scenario.
Yeah,
I'll go out and try and figure that out as we get there. What's harder to find, a winger like Jake Neighbors or a centerman that's 100
but
points?
But now I'm out Kyrou and Neighbors in this scenario.
Yeah, the centerman that is a 100-point player, I'd rather have Pettersson.
Who's on his wing?
I'll figure it out as we go along. At some point, you'll have Snuggerud in that conversation.
Yeah, your wingers would be Booch and Holloway.
And at that point, like maybe Dvorsky
if you're doing
gets
Neighbors, you're keeping
wing.
Bolduc, Snuggerud. Dvorsky's honestly a winger for you now.
Yeah,
Dvorsky becomes a winger for you because Schenn moves to your third-line center, and then your third line, you're talking about a couple of... Now you have more opportunities for these younger players to be the wingers that we've talked about to where you give up in bulk.
I wouldn't crush them if they did it. It would be a fun thing to do. I would probably say no. I would hold out hope and hope that I get that elite level winger. I think the biggest thing that the Blues are missing right now is an elite winger. And Elias Pettersson is an elite center, which matters every bit as much. But I think that top-line winger is the thing that I would be waiting
What teams are better than you up the middle if you've got Thomas and Pettersson? Like, obviously, Edmonton.
It's a slim pickings.
You might be the second best team in the Western Conference in terms of down the middle of a 1-2 punch.
And you've got Parayko and Broberg, which is pretty damn good as a 1-2 punch when it comes to your defensemen. Like, you're starting to build things out with that elite level you finally have done the thing that you have really never done, which is have the elite level pieces on defense and up the middle.
Yep.
Compared to what they had been previously, which is just really good everywhere. So it'd be a different way to build, but a fun one.
And not to knock everybody's optimism down and excitement, it's not happening.
No,
but what I'm saying is Pedersen's not getting traded.
I agree.
It's going to be JT Miller, and it's basically going to, and I would not trade for JT Miller.
All right, last thing
We
here.
didn't want to have fun today.
Sorry,
This one
buddy.
comes from the 314. Alex, it seems strange to me that the Blues have given up on Matthew Joseph as a potential piece that can help them. Do you think that he is somebody they will look to trade prior to the deadline?
I don't. I don't think it's a matter of like they've given up on Matthew Joseph. It's just he hasn't played to the same level as some of these other guys. Like Matthew Joseph, now some of this is because he hasn't been in the lineup, but Matthew Joseph hasn't had a point since October 26th. He's only played 16 games since then, but there's guys that have just been performing better. Me personally, I would have him in over Brandon Saad. But they're using Saad on the top line, and I can't put Joseph there. And they don't want to break up Holloway, Shen, and Kyrou, obviously. So I wouldn't. I mean, like, if you don't think he's a third or fourth line winger for you next year, then maybe you explore it in the offseason. But, I mean, he was a salary dump for Ottawa. So, like, it's not like there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be calling about it. So I think he's better for you than just getting rid of him.
He's Alex, this T-Bone on BK. Coming up next, we'll get the latest on Nolan Arenado and how the Cardinals are planning to approach Brendan Donovan, Lars Nootbaar, Ryan Helsley, all of that prior to today's arbitration hearings deadline with Katie Wu next year on 101 ESPN. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Always a good day when we get to be joined by Katie Woo, Cardinals insider for The Athletic and 101 ESPN. You can, of course, follow her on Twitter at KatieJWoo. She joins us now via the Callier and Thompson hotline. Katie, it seems like you've been traveling all over this offseason, so you've certainly been more active than the Cardinals have been. How are you doing today?
I'm well, guys. And, to say that anyone has been more active than the Cardinals, I mean, that's a pretty low bar. So, yeah.
T-Bone went on a walk, which means that he's been more active.
Yeah, my 4-month-old is eating carrots now, Katie. She's more active than the Cardinals.
Yeah, and that's evidenced by the fact that we're all freaking out over arbitration deadline day. What are we doing? But such is the nature, right, when the Cardinals virtually haven't done anything.
Come on, Katie, we need news. Otherwise, what is BK going to complain about,
That's fair, first of all. Second of all, I didn't sound the alarms earlier today, worth noting. And third of all, our boss, Mike Ryder, came in here before our segment, Katie, and said, Katie's coming on when it's the deadline for the arbitration hearings. I was like, yeah, I think she's good.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe, I don't know. Guys. It's January 9th. I certainly thought that there would be more to talk about. I was going through my story metrics page, just looking at data, and if Nolan Arenado did not appear in the headline, I think I've virtually written maybe 3 other stories about the Cardinals this offseason. So
nice.
We'll see.
Good for you, Katie.
You can get it, Katie.
How's your golf game right now?
You think it'd be better. It's not good.
Hey, touche, Katie, touche.
All right, let's get to Nolan Arenado. That's the big story. You had a really good piece earlier this week, Katie, that was well reported on where things stand with him, which is frankly not all that different from where things stood with him after he nixed the deal with the Astros. But for our audience that may not have read your story or doesn't know where things stand with him, Katie, explain to us what's going on with Nolan Arenado. Is he going to be a Cardinal next year? Where do things stand there?
Actually, guys, I think we might have jinxed it because I am seeing some arbitration stuff come in. So hopefully I'll be able to multitask and confirm and report at the same time. This was a big
I've got one for you, Katie. According to Robert Murray, Ryan Helsley and the Cardinals have settled at $8.2 million.
BK panicked over
I just
nothing.
put that out there. So that's...
According to Katie Woo is what I meant to say.
Yeah, unbelievable.
Ryan Helsley, Cardinals avoid arbitration. They settle at $8.2 million for 2025 per source. And per Robert Murray as well, good friend of mine. It's a big payday for Helsley. It's well-deserved. And I personally am relieved because a trial for Helsley heading into 2025, I think would have been terrible for both sides. So that's the BKO. I think in real time, that might be the fastest BKO we've ever had.
No, Katie, you aren't wrong with that, but the power of this thing has shut down airlines. Yeah. It's given Albert Pujols his 700th home run. It's very powerful,
while
Katie.
I was there and decided not to go to the game. Not on my own accord, but
BK chose food over Albert Pujols' history.
Not my choice. All right, Katie, let's call an audible real quick. Let's talk about this Helsley thing, and then we'll get to Arenado here in just a moment. So Ryan Helsley settles at $8.2 million. There were some reports earlier today that he was asking for like 9+. Whatever. We don't have to worry about all that now that it's been settled at 8.2. Why is this important in your mind for the Cardinals to just have a deal, avoid arbitration, and now they know where they're at with Ryan Helsley?
Well, one, I think it just makes more sense for everyone, right? The Cardinals, they really value Helsley as evidenced by their want to keep him, right? They're pretty disinclined to trade Helsley. It's been that way pretty much throughout the offseason. So it makes sense that they're able to find a number that makes sense. I think 8.2, given where Helsley was last year, right around 3.5, 3.6. And given how his performance was in 2024, it's a pretty sizable raise, but it's well-deserved. It lets the Cardinals know because they have so much uncertainty regarding the payroll and Nolan Arenado, which we will get to. At least they have what I consider a pivotal player's salary locked up, and they don't have to worry about it. That's also huge for Helsley. You guys remember in 2023, the Cardinals took him to trial, and he was so candid about how that was really just an unenjoyable experience for him and how it did negatively impact him to start the season. And we all remember how the Cardinals started 2023 not great. It was actually such a bad experience for Helsley that he switched agencies at the end of the 2023 season. So it's important for the player. They obviously want to get the most that they can out of Helsley. Mo wants to field a competitive club. He said it. He believes Helsley is a key part to that. Right here, they just lock it up. They give Helsley nothing to question about heading into 2025, and they can pivot their efforts elsewhere.
Do you expect the same thing, Katie, for the other bullpen arm in terms of JoJo Romero? Because that seems to be the area that if the Cardinals are going to be adding to, it's the only area seemingly that they're able to.
Yeah, when you think about the other players up for arbitration, right, in the bullpen, Jojo Romero and John King, I can't really see them making numbers that are going to make or break the St. Louis Cardinals, or shouldn't at least. I would imagine that their bullpen is, at least somewhat finalized here, because they don't really have, when you think about their depth in their bullpen, they're not bringing back Andrew Kittredge, right? So Jojo Romero's value goes up a little bit there. But they plan on using a lot of those and kind of using the depth that they have in the minor leagues to fill out that bullpen. I haven't really seen them in any kind of free agency market. And, you could argue they need a setup man. I would agree with you, but it doesn't seem like they've explored that. So I don't think the Cardinals are going to get too hung up over their bullpen arb guys. I know there's been some things about Brendan Donovan, Lars Nootbaar out there. I'd be surprised if there's any big news, but we'll certainly see. I think the biggest question for me was Helsley, so it's nice to see the Cardinals and Helsley settle and avoid that trial.
All right, so that's the Helsley side of things. Otherwise, hopefully we avoid any of the big news. That way Katie can talk with us here for another few minutes on 101 ESPN. We're talking with Katie Woo of The Athletic. So, Katie, let's get back to the Nolan Arenado situation. He nixes the deal to Houston. It now seems like Boston is his top choice, and then Morosi came out yesterday and said, well, what about the Mariners? What about the Detroit Tigers? Where do things stand right now with Nolan Arenado based on your reporting?
No change, much to kind of everyone's chagrin, right? I think this is something that the longer we go into the offseason, the more likely it is that Nolan Arenado stays with the Cardinals to start the season. But again, I'd like to caution, we are kind of all waiting for Alex Bregman, right? And when I say all, I mean Nolan, Cardinals, I mean the baseball industry, because Alex Bregman, where he signs, given what we know that's been reported, he's looking at the Detroit Tigers, their players for him, the Toronto Blue Jays, the Boston Red Sox. To me, if Alex Bregman signs with the Boston Red Sox, that all but ensures Nolan Arenado will not be going there, obviously. So it's kind of hard to say what his future is because it hinges so much on another player's choice. I will say, it's not like Nolan has to leave. The Astros, I understand. Again, I haven't criticized him for this decision. I totally understand it's his choice. But the Astros have been one of the top organizations in terms of consistently making the playoffs over the last decade. And if Nolan wasn't willing to waive his no-trade clause for Houston, I'm having a hard time seeing how he would waive it for Seattle or Detroit. I really think the options are limited at this point. And it's not that Nolan isn't willing to go to different teams. I know he's willing to go to a much larger amount of teams than last year. It's just a matter of if those teams want him. And we know the Dodgers have never been players in this offseason. The Yankees were interested, but not at the price that the Cardinals want him to take. Remember, the whole reason the Cardinals are moving Nolan is to offload salary. So they're not going to eat a bunch of it just to move him, right? They'd rather just hang on to him if they have to. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose. Right now, it just kind of feels like we're all waiting for Alex Bregman to see if he picks the Red Sox or not, and then we'll be able to decide to maybe speculate a little bit more accurately about Arenado's future.
Katie, I don't know if you have the answer to this question, and if you don't, feel free to just say, I'm not sure. But what is your understanding on why Nolan Arenado decided to nix the deal to the Astros? Was there a specific reason for that?
It was twofold, and we talked about this in prior reporting on The Athletic. One came down to the timing of the offseason, right? He felt like it was still early. It was mid-December, but Bregman hadn't signed yet. And I think everyone was kind of under the assumption that Bregman would have signed by now. However, we were wrong, right? So he wasn't quite sure what his market looked like. There were just like he is right now. He is still not sure what his market looks like. But there was and I think this is also a valid reason, no matter who you're going to. The Astros had traded Kyle Tucker 2 days before. And if the Astros are looking to bring in Nolan Arenado, they're probably not bringing back Alex Bregman. And the Houston Astros are an entirely different team without Kyle Tucker and Alex Bregman. So my understanding is that Nolan wanted to just kind of see what the Astros would do, and he wasn't ready to commit to the first offer that was there, the first offer that there was some interest in, right? He wanted to say, hey, look, the Astros are great, but they're different without their top two players, obviously. So I'm not saying no. I'm just saying not right now. And if the Astros need to move on, I understand, but this just doesn't feel right. So according to multiple people that have talked to me about that situation, those were the kind of two main factors. He said no. Cardinals didn't love that answer. And the Astros, as we know, pivoted 2 days later to Christian Walker.
So, Katie, what does this do if Nolan Arenado is back? Obviously, he's going to be playing, but the vibes can't be that great for a Nolan Arenado. They're professional, but this seemingly takes away some playing time for some of these younger players that the Cardinals held 14 press conferences saying that we've got to get our younger players involved.
Yes, you're spot on. And the way that you look at Nolan Arenado potentially coming back next year is kind of just what direction do you want the Cardinals to be in? So if you are full in on the youth movement, like the Cardinals have advertised over and over again as their main priority, Nolan Arenado makes that a little difficult, right? Because you already have Wilson Contreras going to first base. Now Nolan's going to be at third if he stays. What does that do for Nolan Gorman, someone that Mo has said twice to me that he wants to see at least 500 at-bats next year? Where are you going to put him? Are you going to put him at second base? Okay, that's fine. What does that do for Brendan Donovan? Is he going to be that super utility? Probably. He can handle it. We know this. It's one of his best traits. That's not that big of a deal. What about Thomas Ajayce? Now he's on the outside looking in. If you move Donovan to the outfield, now all of a sudden your outfield's crowded, right? Because you've already promised playing time to Jordan Walker. You need to see that out of him. You need to see if Lars Nootbaar can stay on the field for 140, 145 games, right? So now your outfield's crowded. What is Mike Stiani going to look like? What about Victor Scott? So it just complicates things. Alec Burleson, we haven't even brought up him. That's how much the logjam is, right? Now, if you want the Cardinals to win as many games as possible, Nolan Arenado makes you a better team. So it's not the end of the world if Nolan stays, obviously. I mean, I'm sure it wouldn't be the best scenario for both sides, considering both the team and the player agreed that a trade would probably be the best for both sides. But it's not like Nolan's going to come back and pout, right? He's not going to be unprofessional about the situation. If anything, because he wants to play for a contender so bad, I can see him really, at least hoping, to take on another level of play and, be much better than he was in 23 and 2024, and efforts to maybe get traded at the deadline. Either way, though, guys, it's complicated, it's messy, it's drama, and it is something to talk about with virtually nothing else to talk about in January.
So, Katie, a follow-up on that. You mentioned the Cardinals, their main priority on why they want to trade Nolan Arenado is to get rid of the money. You've also put in your reporting over on The Athletic, if they can't move Nolan Arenado, they could pivot and trade some of the pitchers. My guess is you're talking about, like, Fetty and Matz there, but that's me reading into that. I don't want to put words into your mouth, so maybe you could clarify that for me if I'm wrong on that. Out of curiosity,
I think you're spot on.
Out of curiosity, Katie, how much money does this team have to cut from its payroll? Because they're already down an estimated $30 million from last year's opening day 26-man payroll. Are we talking about them having to cut $50 to $60 million in payroll prior to opening day and then having similar payrolls to the likes of the Colorado Rockies and the Kansas City Royals? That's where they're at now?
Well, they certainly don't have to cut anything, as you and I both know, right? This is an ownership choice, and I do understand some of the rationale behind it. Yes, there will be a decline in ticket sales next year. They're preparing for that. Yes, they did lose 25% of their promised revenue from their restructured television deal. However, the choice to cut payroll is not a Mo choice. It's not an Ollie choice. It's a choice from ownership, and it remains to be seen just how far they're willing to take a pay cut, right? So moving Nolan is the easiest way to move that money. And the Cardinals aren't looking to move all $74 million of it. They were willing to eat somewhat of a minority of that contract with the Astros deal that fell through. But if they don't trade Nolan, they're going to have to get creative and maybe offload some salaries like Eric Fetty's or Steven Matz. Also, while that's a combined $19.5 million, they're also the two players in the rotation that don't have a full no-trade clause that are veterans at least. So they're the easiest to move from that standpoint. Doesn't sound like, again, that they're going to move Helsley. It's confusing to me at this point because if financial restrictions are why you want to move Nolan so bad, I understand that is a lot of money, but it's not like the Cardinals weren't profitable until 2023, right? Even in 2023, they still drew a pretty large amount of fans. They had one bad season in 2024 in terms of attendance, and the TV deals are legit for about a third of the but still, it's I wish we kind of knew, and this is going to be very difficult to find out, how much money they're really investing in player development, because that's important. That needs to happen. It needs to have happened years ago. And it sounds like it's going to be a major multi-year investment. But I could also hear the argument where you can do both at the same time. You don't have to severely strip down payroll while investing all of your money in player development. How the Cardinals elect to allocate their resources, however, again, is an ownership decision, and it's one that is definitely not very popular with fans right now.
Yeah, it just feels like, listen, I grew up in Kansas City. They have a smaller TV deal than the Cardinals do by like threefold, and they get like a third of the fans in the stands on a regular basis as the Cardinals do, and they potentially will have the same payroll heading into opening day this year as the St. Louis Cardinals. So even with a downturn in both of those numbers for the Cardinals, it feels strange that they would be in the same market as Kansas City. But hey, man, not my team, not my money, so it's hard for me to say exactly how to spend it. All right, last thing here, Katie, and this can be a quick one for you. We talked about this a bit yesterday, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. Do you think that the Cardinals would consider Lars Nootbaar in center field if Nolan Arenado is back next season to kind of make everything else work with the young guys that you've talked about?
It's a really fascinating question and something that I could see them doing. I would like to see it. I think at that point you have nothing to lose, but also, are you blocking Victor Scott? I would really like to see what Victor Scott looks like in spring training. I thought he was not really put in a position to succeed last year. Not a knock on him. But I don't know. I think it's something that we'll find out during spring training, and it's definitely an interesting storyline as we come into pitchers and catchers in just about a month, guys.
She's Katie Woo. We'll be talking with her as the Cardinals season ramps up here on BK and Ferrario. Find all of her fantastic work over at The Athletic, and be sure to follow her on Twitter at Katie J. Woo, and listen to her on Cardinals Territory with Trevor Rosenthal. So check out their new podcast that they're doing. It's available for you. You can find all of the links for that on Twitter at Katie J. Woo. Katie, congratulations on all the success, especially with this new projects that you've been working on. We wish you nothing but the best, and we'll talk with you again soon.
You got it, guys. Thanks so much. I'll see you next weekend, most likely.
Absolutely. That's Katie Woo. Appreciate her time as always here on BK and Ferrario. All right, Alex, there's a ton to react to there. Want to talk about what she said about Nolan Arenado, what that means for the team, the Ryan Helsley arbitration process that they just avoided. Thank God for everybody. That national nightmare is now over. We'll get into all of that so much more next year on BK and Ferrario. All right, so we just got done talking to Katie Wu, Cardinals insider for The Athletic. She had updates on Nolan Arenado, Ryan Helsley, who, by the way, has avoided arbitration. $8 million is what he's going to be getting for the 2025 season. That's good for the Cardinals. That's good for Ryan Helsley. It avoids arbitration, which was a problem for him back in 2023. It affected his performance on the field and certainly his mindset off of it. So good on everybody to avoid that arbitration process. It sounds like they did not avoid arbitration with any of their other eligible players. That's your read on this, T-Bone? We heard that correctly?
That's my sense. I haven't seen anything that's reported otherwise. So unless it's a deal that just has to process through the commissioner's office, it sounds like everybody else is going to ARB.
Okay. We'll keep you updated if we see anything new that ends up coming out on that. But as of right now, sounds like the Cardinals do not have any other arbitration deals that we have seen just yet that will avoid that process. So that means potentially Donovan, Nootbaar, they could be going to arbitration, for example. The other thing, the other out there is what happened last year with Tommy Edman. Tommy Edman did not agree to a deal at this deadline, and then prior to arbitration, agreed to a new 2-year contract that avoided not just the 2024 season's arbitration process, but also the 2025 season's arbitration process. So that is another route that they could go with one of or both of Newt and Brendan Donovan. So that's your update on the arbitration deadline today. I wanted to get to the payroll stuff. I find that to be maybe the most interesting conversation, maybe the most important conversation about the Cardinals, because it dictates what happens with Nolan Arenado. And then if not trading Nolan Arenado, it dictates the possibility of them really weakening their strength right now, which is their pitching, by trading Eric Fetty and Steven Matz out of necessity instead of because they have the surplus, right? So as of today, Cott's contracts projects the Cardinals to be at roughly $146 million in payroll. That could be off by a little bit here or there, depending on arbitration numbers, all those different things. But let's call it between $145 and $150 million is where they're currently at. Well, if the Cardinals are planning to drop that, another $20 to $25 million, they would be at, let's call it, $125 million in payroll going into next season. The Kansas City Royals are at 117 right now. And it sounds like they're still potentially active. They might still do other stuff in the market this offseason. The Colorado Rockies are the perfect comparison. They are at exactly $125 million right now in payroll. The Colorado Rockies. The Colorado Rockies do not currently have a TV deal. Now, they have one through Major League Baseball. And what was it? The Padres made like $30 million off of that or something last year?
Something like that, yeah.
The Rockies used to make $50 million off of their TV deal. They were dropped by Bally's. And now we're going through MLB TV. They're not getting more from MLB. I can tell you that much with pretty strong certainty. So they're making less by a significant margin than the Cardinals through their TV deal. If you want to look at attendance numbers, well, the Cardinals last year had a significant drop in attendance, all the way down to 7th in all of Major League Baseball at 35,000 as their average home attendance last year. Again, 7th in Major League Baseball. The Colorado Rockies, who actually do better in attendance than I think most would think, were 15th at 31,000. The Cardinals could have another significant drop this year and still be ahead of where the Colorado Rockies are in terms of paid attendance. Kansas City, which is the other team that I mentioned, their average attendance last season was 20,000 per game, which was good, quote unquote, for 26th in Major League Baseball. So the Royals are making less with their TV deal. They're making significantly less with their ticket revenues. And yet they're spending roughly the same on their Major League Baseball team as the St. Louis Cardinals. It's just hard for me to understand, Alex. I'm sure that, like, maybe there is an explanation for it, and I would love to hear it. But thus far, I haven't heard a super convincing argument as to why they need to tear things down this much. If you want to trade Nolan Arenado because you view it as the best thing for your baseball club to have those opportunities for young players, dude, I am your target demo for that argument. I agree with it wholeheartedly. But if the argument to trade Nolan Arenado, and this is just like about the process of it that bothers me, if the argument that they have to trade Nolan Arenado is we have to get his money off of the books, we cannot trade him unless we get as much money off of the books as possible. Like, if that's the thing that's holding things up, for example, with the New York Yankees, that's crazy to me. I don't understand it at all. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't compute. Do you guys see something that I am missing because I'm boneheaded and I don't understand these things and I have the IQ of 40?
Well, you're right with everything you just said. Meaning the back half of that. But no, I don't see anything different with you. To me, this is just the Cardinals' ownership wanting to keep as much bucks as possible in their wallet because they're anticipating a real downgrade in attendance over these next few years. They know they're going to be bad. They realize the temperature of the fan base is very frustrated, so they don't expect a lot of money coming through the gates. But it still doesn't negate the fact that you are getting money from a TV deal over these next couple of years, and you already have shed a ton of money off of your roster. The Arenado thing makes a lot of sense to me. And frankly, for the Cardinals, I think it's a good look for them to try and get rid of Nolan Arenado so that they can play their younger players. Because guess what? They haven't been trying to do that over the last couple of years. And frankly, it's why they're at right now. But if this is Arenado doesn't get traded, and so now we're going to trade Fetty and Matz and somebody else off of our roster because we got to cut money as possible, you're just going to look cheap. You're going to look like the Colorado Rockies. You're going to look like the Cincinnati Reds. And honestly, that is not a good look for a Cardinals team that is about to go through a couple of years of quieter times. The Cardinals will always dominate, but man, if you've got cheap ownership that's just trying to cut money for cut money's sake, and you're not playing competitive baseball, it's going to be really hard to sell like, well, we're improving our minor league team. No, you were trying to improve your minor league team, but you were trying to bring as much money back to you as possible.
It's just hard for me to understand. Like, if somebody wants to explain it from the Cardinals, I'm open to hearing the explanation. And they've got their winter warm-up next week, and we'll give them that opportunity. Like, we're going to be out there.
Well, they'll do well with that.
And
there's going to be like 100 press conferences.
It's a question that's going to have to be asked of John Mozeliak. I think he's speaking on next Saturday, if I'm not mistaken. We'll be there. We'll ask the question of, like, can you explain to us why the payroll has to go down the way that it does? And I'm sure he'll defer the question to Monday, which is when Bill DeWitt Jr. and Bill DeWitt III will be available.
That's
Unfortunately,
smart.
It's during our show, so we can't be there, but I'm sure the question will be asked.
Genius.
And like people like Derek or Katie or John Denton, like they'll be out there, they'll be asking these questions, and I just want to know the answer. That's the thing that I am the most curious about, because it appears to be dictating their decisions this offseason as opposed to what I think should be determining their offseason moves, which is what's best for our baseball future. Not just for 2025, but beyond. Like, what is the best thing for St. Louis Cardinals baseball to get back to championship contention? That should be the North Star for every decision that the Cardinals are making. And instead, at least based on my understanding, which could be wrong, I'm open to that possibility. But based on everything we're hearing with the reporting, it appears that the thing that's dictating these decisions is money.
Yeah, and
that seems wrong to me.
That's the funny part for me. I think we know the answer to what we're asking. I just think we're all trying to search for a different answer because we don't like the answer. I really think this is just about keeping money in their pockets as much as possible. And that's where it comes to the deferring and try and flip the sentences when you answer that question to sound more like we're trying to improve our ball club, when it really comes down to, we know we're not going to be bringing in money and we need money.
But they are still bringing in money. This is where I will push back, and not against you, Alex, but against that idea that they're not going to be a revenue-driving organization. Dude, they're still doing okay, although much worse with their TV deal. There are a lot of organizations that are in much worse shape with their TV deal than where the Cardinals are at right now. And they're still going to be doing pretty well, although worse, acknowledging that. Again, there are a lot of organizations that are doing significantly worse when it comes to their attendance going into next season. Like, they'll probably be, what do you think, like 12th, somewhere around there? That would be a 3,000 to 5,000 drop per game. That's probably a pretty significant drop in attendance year over year. And it's possible that ends up happening. Maybe they go all the way down to 16th, which is where Milwaukee was last year, at 30,000 people per game. That's a 5,000 person per game drop in attendance. That's a huge, huge drop year over year. It's possible, I suppose. Even in that scenario, you're still 17th in Major League Baseball in attendance on a per game basis. And you're probably around there when it comes to your revenue, maybe even above that for your TV deal. And you're below that now, potentially, with what we're talking about with their payroll. So it just feels weird to me. Feels like a weird place for them to be. And I understand they're investing in their minor league system. Guys, they're investing in a way that other teams have been for years. So it's not like they're investing and then going well beyond where these other organizations are. No, they're catching up. That's what this offseason is about, is catching up with the Joneses. And when I say the Joneses, I'm talking about teams like Detroit and Kansas City and Milwaukee, which have been spending on these things for years. So it's just very strange to me. Do you guys think Nolan Arenado's getting traded?
No.
Damn.
I agree with what Katie said. If he's not going to go to Houston, he's not going to Seattle and Detroit.
I agree. I think he's a St. Louis Cardinal, and they will pivot and trade Matz and Fetty. And, to your
It's
point
not the worst pivot in the world.
It's
we all
not,
thought
but
that's something they
it's
should
really
do
Fetty.
anyways. But
I will
it's
say-
weird the order of operations again.
Let's not put
that's
Matz
where
in
it is
this
for me.
conversation, though. Like, it's Fetty.
Well, I think they got to move Matz.
No, I'm saying Matz isn't as important as
Nobody's
Fetty.
going to be upset to see
No.
Matz go.
Matz has been trying to
I
get.
will.
People have been trying to trade Matz since last year.
He's a nice guy.
I also think he could go on to have a pretty good role with somebody else. Like, there's a role for Steven
'Cause he's
Matz
not
on a
in the
good
Cardinals.
team.
Oh yeah, they'll get angry. Fans will get angry when he goes on to be like a number 3 in a rotation next year.
If
but
he's healthy, he's going to be good somewhere.
He's still going to have a Shamanaya postseason.
For sure.
With whoever it is that he ends up with.
Milwaukee.
But those moves, by the way, when you mentioned the process, and this is why it, for me, is a money-ordinated thing, and I agree with you, it doesn't make sense. And by the way, we didn't even mention, you ran off the ticket sales dropping and the TV deal. Don't forget they're going to get a pretty good chunk of change when it comes to gambling that's coming to Missouri as well, with the advertising and potentially putting a sports book in Ballpark Village if they decide to do that. So they're going to get a pretty good chunk of change made back up. Maybe it doesn't fill any of those voids, but they're going to get a pretty good penny out of that. What makes us a clear we need to cut payroll is, if you get rid of Arenado, I get the sense of, hey, we clear up playing time, but also you free up $20 million from your books for the next 2 years. And I'm on board with that of, hey, let's kind of reset things for Chaim Bloom. You don't get that in Matz and Fetty, right? Because that only impacts this year. So that tells you it is hey, we have to slash payroll. And I don't know how you get to that conclusion if you're the St. Louis Cardinals.
That's Tanner. He's Alex. I'm BK. If you guys missed anything from our conversation with Katie Wu, I thought it was really insightful. Check it out on the podcast page. 101ESPN.com. The free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Schaefer Door Company.
Coming up next, some NFL quick hitters here on BK and Ferrario.
Tanner Hendricks near the Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Blues back in action tonight as they take on the Anaheim Ducks. We'll have pregame coverage starting at 6 o'clock with Alex Ferrario and Joey Vitale. Then puck drop at 7 o'clock with the voice of the Blues, Chris Kerber. Cardinal news, according to our Cardinals insider Katie Wu, the St. Louis Cardinals have settled with Ryan Helsley to avoid arbitration at an $8.2 million salary for 2025. She also is reporting that they did not settle with Lars Nootbaar. He will go to arbitration, and so will Andre Palante. The Sports Update was driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at Londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
All right, let's dive into some NFL quick hitters with Alex and T-Bone. I'm BK. You got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Let's start out with a little bit of kind of news-ish from earlier today. Pat McAfee had Drew Rosenhaus on his show, which is the agent for Tyreek Hill. And Drew Rosenhaus told Pat McAfee, the Miami Dolphins have a lot of problems. Tyreek Hill is not one of them.
99 problems?
He then went on to say Tyreek Hill had a productive conversation with the Dolphins brass, including Mike McDaniel, Chris Greer, their general manager, and they all came to the decision that Tyreek Hill is going to be with them for next season. Alex, what do you think happened in those conversations? What do you think led to us going from Tyreek Hill saying, I'm out, dog, to Tyreek Hill saying, I'm back, dog?
So, the more I've listened to the Tyreek Hill thing, I also think that, Tyreek Hill was all over the place in that postgame, and I think he realized that this was going off the rails quick, and he's like, I just need to stop talking. But I think what also happened was Miami went to him and said, you're not getting traded because we aren't screwing our franchise up because you want out. You will be here or you will just not play football. So which one you want to do for your legacy, Tyreek? And then he did the peace sign and said, I'll see you in Miami in training camp. This was obvious from the start. But again, listening to his whole rant, it started with how he was defending his team, saying, look, Tua was gone for 7 weeks. What do you expect? And then it was, my legacy's the playoffs. And then it's, well, I'm not in the playoffs. And it's man, I need to be in the playoffs next year. And if it's not here, it's somewhere else. And then it's somebody was standing next to him off camera, Tyreek, shut the bleep up. And he's you know what? I'm out, dog. And he's I need to stop talking.
All right, next thing that I wanted to get to, T-Bone, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Mike Vrabel, it was reported earlier today on ESPN.com. He's probably going to be the next head coach of the New England Patriots. Sounds like they're going to go through the whole song and dance of guys that they're going to interview, but ultimately they're probably going to come back to Mike Vrabel and go with the guy that they know. It was also reported Vrabel is likely to hire Josh McDaniels as his offensive coordinator with the New England Patriots. T-Bone, would this inspire you if you're a Patriots fan? Drake May being paired with Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels.
Yeah, I think it would. I think it's because, I look at Mike Vrabel, I think he's a very good head coach. And I think when you look at Josh McDaniels, look, we've seen he sucks as a head coach. He's a great offensive coordinator. And you've got a franchise quarterback in Drake May that showed some real promise. I've seen McDaniels have success with, granted, it was the best of all time in Tom Brady. I think he could get Drake May to reach another level. I don't know if he'll get him to his peak performance, but he'll at least help him take some strides. So if I'm a Patriots fan, yeah, I can convince myself on, it's more for me, the Mike Vrabel side of things than the Josh McDaniels. But, if McDaniels tags along, I'm in.
I think that's pretty much where I'm at. I think this would be a good hire. Vrabel's the best coach available this offseason, in my opinion. He's the surest thing. We know he's a really good NFL coach, if nothing else. And Josh McDaniels, we know, is a really good offensive coordinator. I would be curious to see how that molds with Drake May, who's a very different quarterback than the guy that that McDaniels had the vast majority of his success with, which was Tom Brady. May is more of a push the ball down the field, super athletic, move the pocket type of a guy. Brady was very much stand in the pocket, deliver, quick, accurate, those kinds of things. So it is a very different offense that he would have to run. But good offense coordinators typically adjust to their personnel. Next thing that I wanted to get to prior to this upcoming weekend in the NFL with the Wild Card weekend. This is from a story about how Washington, the Commanders, got back on track this year. Take out the month when Jaden Daniels was not healthy, which was week 7 to week 12, and week 18 when Marcus Mariota played the majority of the team snaps. So you're taking out basically 5 games for the Washington Commanders. But just looking at the games where Jaden Daniels was healthy and played the majority of the game, Washington averaged 3.1 points per drive this season. To give context to that, that would have been the highest mark for any team in any season since the 2007 New England Patriots.
Oh, baby.
Are we underselling the possibility that Washington could come into this year's postseason and just take the league by storm with this offense that's led by Jaden Daniels?
I mean, I'm optimistic about it. Would I be betting on it? Probably not. I think I'm going to bet on them winning the first round against Tampa Bay. I think they're the better team. I love the story with it, but at some point the Cinderella story does fall flat. And like the Jaden Daniels offense, I think can win a couple of games. I don't know if it's getting to the Super Bowl in this first year, but it sure as hell has me more optimistic about Jaden Daniels as the guy moving forward, like the best one from that draft class. But I think he could win a couple of games. I don't think he's going to get to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I don't know if we're underselling it because, like, I think we all, maybe I'm wrong, I think all of us think they can beat Tampa, right?
Oh, yeah. I could see that game going either direction.
And then they run into Detroit, and I think that's the best case scenario for them, honestly, because of Detroit's defense. I think they have
that would
a
be
path.
Fun as hell game to watch.
Yeah, I think they actually have a realistic path to the NFC Championship game. But to me, that's where it ends because I look at their defense. Look, the offense is fun and all, and I trust their defense more than I do like the Lions, for example, going into these playoffs. I don't know if I trust the defense to say, hey, we need to stop this drive. That defense is going to do it. And that's where it is for me. You have to have that kind of defense when you get to the playoffs. That's why I kind of trusted the Chiefs last year. It was, Mahomes doesn't have great weapons, but holy bleep, look at that defense.
Dude, I don't know who's coming out of this NFC. I have no idea. I don't trust any of these teams. None of them. Not one. Even the Packers, who you guys know I'm really high on. Dude, their secondary is totally beat up. They might not have their number one corner going into this weekend. He was out last week, and I just thought, okay, they're resting him up for the first round of the playoffs. He might not play, Jair Alexander. So they're not in a good place. The Eagles, I think, have a pretty good defense, but do you really trust Jalen Hurts? I don't right now, to be honest.
I also don't trust their defense. I think they're good at times, and I think they are exposed at times. And you play against one good offense, I think they get exposed.
I think that's totally fair, especially a quarterback that's willing to take the stuff across the middle of the field. Like you go up against the LA Rams, for example. Puka's going to live all day in the middle of the field against them. The Rams have a really interesting path, man. Yeah. I didn't want to believe it when T-Bone mentioned this like 6 weeks ago. He's right. The Rams, with the way that they are assembled, the defense kind of coming together a little bit, not great, but good. The offense having an established quarterback that I do trust in big games, having the type of arm that can either beat a defense deep the way that you have to against the Rams or the Vikings, or a team like the Eagles that's just going to have everything go underneath, and you've got Puka who can win after the catch. They have the type of formula that I would expect to be able to win in this kind of a NFC playoff. So to answer the question directly myself, I think some people, maybe not in this room, some people are underselling the possibility of Washington coming out of the NFC. I still don't expect them to do it, though. It's a really high bar that they're going to have to clear. All right, he's Alex. That's T-Bone. I'm BK. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. One other note on the playoff quarterbacks. There are only two quarterbacks this year in the postseason over the age of 30. It's Matt Stafford and Russell Wilson. We're seeing a changing of the guard. It has started to take place over the last few years, but now, like the elder statesmen, Jared Goff at 30, Patrick Mahomes and Baker Mayfield at 29 years old.
Nice.
Other than that, it's Stafford and Russ, who's kind of on his last legs, as we have seen. All right, coming up next, let's dive into the junk drawer. Dave Reid, NHL Network analyst, is going to join us coming up at 1 o'clock. He was at the World Juniors breaking those things down for NHL Network. He's going to tell us what he saw from Dalibor Dvorsky and how far he thinks he is away from being a contributor at the NHL level. Dave Reid in 10 minutes. Junk drawer next here on 101 ESPN. Dive into the junk drawer with Alex and T-Bone on BK. Dave Reid of NHL Network is going to join the show here in just a few minutes, coming up at the top of the hour. Alex, did you see the weather reports for tonight?
Oh, yeah, buddy, I did. Just when I'll be walking out of that Blues stadium, wrapping up
nice?
post-game.
Another 3 to 5 inches of snow? Is that real?
That's my neck of the woods. You're only getting like 1 to 3.
Yeah. And it's like a 50% chance of that.
My neck of the woods, shout out Jeffco, we're getting 3 to 5.
Yeah.
I walked outside yesterday. First of all, it's way too cold overnight right now. I just can't do this.
That's true. I took the trash out last night. Whew.
I woke up at like 2 because I was worried our pipes were going to freeze, and I walked through my entire house and just turned on a sink. I just like turned it on at like 2, and I'm like, okay, I should be good till 7.
Dude, the snow drifts are like my height. And then they're T-Bone's height.
Yeah. Come on, man. T-Bone.
We add another 3 to 5 inches to
lost.
that. I don't know that we're going to be able to make through this. This is ridiculous.
We let our little tiny dog Penny out, and like I lost her the other night. Like I couldn't find her. She was just trying to trounce around in the snow to find a spot to pee.
Our dog just
In the house?
No, well, yes, but also right outside of the door. Like if you go out our side door right now, just yellow. There's poop to your right. It's just
We've just put a
disgusting.
towel down because our dog's old and senile and blind and deaf. We just put a towel on that she continues to pee on and just say, just pee on this. It's a puppy pad.
Our son's gonna go stir crazy. Like he can't stay inside this long. I don't know how. Like people that have, I would say 5 to 10-year-olds. I have no idea how you're doing it right now with your kids being out of school as long as they have been in a lot of places.
I think well, not all, but some parents, like my mom used to love it. She'd say, go run outside for a little bit, and then you
but
come
it's
in.
freezing
I know,
out
but then
right
you
now.
come in, and then you're tired, and then they take a nap.
I mean, we
I'm
just
speaking from my experience.
I mean,
of napping.
we've got our basement's finished. So, like, luckily, it's kind of like a playground for them. We just send them down there and they'll play for a good, 2 hours. But our 2-year-old doesn't really care. Emma, Adelaide's the one that, you could see it start, the wheels start turning, I need to get outside. And it's like, sorry.
I got to be around other kids my age. I got to move. I got to have space to play.
And, this is really cold. 2 days ago, we let her go out there. We just put layers on her and let her go out for 15, 20 minutes. But it takes it between January and February. It's I don't know how we're going to survive this as parents.
I have my next Florida trip coming up at the end of this month. You guys think I'm going to be able to make it? Remember a couple of years ago when I barely we were the first flight that left? Am I going to break the airlines again? We're going to have another snowstorm around that time?
Yeah.
Probably.
Cool. Yeah.
So get excited. Last week of January, fully expect another big time snowstorm.
Can we
here in St.
celebrate
Louis.
Christmas again? Christmas it was 50. It didn't feel Christmassy.
Man,
now I'm ready.
I'll take the snow. Just ice, stay the bleep away.
With Alex and T-Bone on BK. Coming up next, we're going to break things down about the St. Louis Blues. What's the future hold for them when it comes to Dalibor Dvorsky, some of the other prospects that were a part of the World Juniors? Dave Reid was there to be able to see everything that happened for the Blues prospects, and he'll join us to break it down next year on 101 ESPN. Alongside Alex and T-Bone on BK, happy to go out to the Callier and Thompson hotline to be joined by a two-time Stanley Cup winner, Dave Reid. He's an NHL Network analyst. You probably saw him as part of their coverage of the World Juniors. He joins us now here on BK and Ferrario. Alex, as we are watching the Blues at the NHL level, we also have an eye turned towards some of their prospects and what they're going to be able to have in the future. Jimmy Snuggerud is one of those guys. Another big one, though, is Dalibor Dvorsky, who had himself another big World Juniors. We're going to talk about his future with Dave Reid here on BK and Ferrario. Dave, we appreciate the time as always, my friend. Let's start out with Dalibor Dvorsky, one of the marquee prospects in the Blues system. What stood out to you about where he's at right now in his development process and how close he is to being NHL ready?
In this tournament, he is definitely NHL ready. I believe it was his fourth tournament that he was playing in. So he's been at the tournament. He knows what the tournament's all about. A lot of times, first-time players come into the tournament, they can be a little overwhelmed. And obviously that wasn't the case with Dalibor. He was so poised and so confident, and everything that Slovakia did went through one line, and that was Dvorsky running that line. As far as his skill level and his IQ, seeing the ice, and that type of thing that you always look at the young prospects where they're at, he's definitely ready to make the step. As a teenager, obviously, I don't think he's ready to necessarily make the step immediately, but I would say by this time next year, even later in this season, I wouldn't be surprised if he got brought in. He's a top six forward. He's not going to be anything else. He's an offensive guy. He's big and strong, incredibly gifted with the puck. You're talking about a playmaker and a goal scorer all in one. So I think he's a great pick. I really enjoyed watching him play. I remember him with the U18s when he was underage, and he was dominant there. Against his peers, he's a dominant player. Unfortunately for Slovakia, and everybody said, well, why didn't they do better if he's that good? Well, other teams have players that are that good too. It worked for their countries. And Slovakia wasn't a deep team. It was a one-line team, and it was Dvorsky was on that line. So Blues had some, they had a lot of prospects. We had one game. I think we had 7 of the prospects in the one game, or was it 6 with Slovakia and Czechia? So, but Dvorsky is definitely, he's closer to the NHL than he's away from the NHL. Put it that way. And when he gets there, it might take him a year or so to really get acclimated to the little extra speed that it brings. But he's happy to play any type of game you want to play.
Dave, I think hearing different people talk within the Blues organization, it's about, him recognizing the other side of the game. Yes, he's got the offensive skill set. It's the defense. It's the puck awareness in your own end. Does that get improved with time in the AHL, or do you feel like that improves once you see what the NHL level is like?
It improves with every level, but until you get to the NHL, it's a different animal. The NHL is, I always say, is an easier league to play in than the American League or the European leagues, because everybody is at the top of their game and the structure's there. So if you're expected to be in an area within about 2 foot area that you're expected to be, and you stay in that area, or you're there. My example would be I played as a winger, and when the puck comes up your boards and you get a play, and you might have your face to the board, but you know exactly where your centerman is supposed to be on the ice. So you can turn, as you're turning, you can move the puck. You're kind of seeing the play as you're making the play, knowing that the player's there. And if the pass goes behind him, if the pass is in the right spot, yeah, you might have missed the pass, but it's because the player is out of position. That doesn't happen in the NHL. 95% of the time, the players are in the proper position. In the American League, you could turn to look, and you've got to know exactly where your teammate is, because he might be below where he's supposed to be. He might have been flying the zone. He might be on the other side of the ice. And that's the understanding and learning the game. So when you get to the NHL for a player like Dalibor, who's understanding and needs to, work the game without the puck, it's easier in the NHL, because when you're on the bench, you're watching the game, and I'm watching a left winger in front of me. I had a guy like Mike Kruszyniski, who was there in Boston when I was there early in my career, and you're watching him, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna follow where he's going. I'm going to be in position where he's doing. This is what he's doing. Whereas in the American League, you follow a veteran player, someone different. Well, there's a reason they're in the American League, is they're not always in the right spot. So in the NHL, as a young player, you can learn by sitting on the bench and learn by watching in the stands. And then when you get in the game, you can implement what you've seen, what you learned, because it is so structured. And the players are, if you're not in the right position, you're not going to be in the league.
Dave,
simple. Whereas in the American League, you're not in the right position. You're learning how to play the game. So I think he'll be fine, but he's like any other young prospect. He'll figure it out. He'll learn, but he's got intangibles that most players don't have coming at that age.
Dave Reid is our guest here on 101 ESPN. We appreciate his time. He's a two-time Stanley Cup winner, and you can see him on NHL Network. That's where he helped out with their World Juniors coverage. Last question that I've got, Dave, on Dalibor Dvorsky. The Blues are kind of walking the tightrope right now. They want to make the playoffs. They've made a couple of moves already in season that would lead towards that, including former Boston Bruins head coach Jim Montgomery being hired as their new head coach and trading for Cam Fowler. But they also are doing more of a youth movement where Dalibor Dvorsky could, whether it's this season or next, be a part of their top six, as you mentioned. I am curious, after seeing him at this tournament, do you think Dalibor Dvorsky is ready to be like a top six center on a playoff caliber team? Because that's a tough needle to thread when you've got such a young guy that is still trying to develop at this level and you're trying to contend with that. Is that something that you think he's close to being ready to do?
That's a tough one. I would probably say, I'd probably say no, because I don't know how many players are ready to do that. I think you'd bring him in on the wing first and get him adapted that way. But there's no use unless you've got an offensive-minded third line. There's no use bringing him into the team and putting him on the third line and putting him in that energy checking role, because that's not the type of player he is. Putting him in a center position is a lot of responsibility. You've got to be able to, you may get stuck out on a defensive draw in your own zone, and that's not something that teams necessarily want to do when you get to the playoffs. So I think the wing position is probably the safer bet. Or you can maybe put him in with someone who can play both positions, and you can put him in the center position. But it's a lot of responsibility being the center in your own zone. Now, a lot of teams go with the F1 type of thing, come back in your own zone. I mean, I played a lot of wing, and when I play with some of the better players in the game, the Peter Forsbergs or the Joe Sakic's, and the odd time I get to play with them, they'd be like, hey, you work deep, which was fine. That was my, I was better at that. That was my thing. And that would be the type of thing you could bring Dalibor in with, a guy who, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head, but it's a difficult situation to put a young player in as a center in the National Hockey League on a contending team. That's why Bedard can play center in Chicago, and when they're talking about moving him to the wing, that's crazy. Let him play. Are you planning on winning a cup? Are you planning on getting the playoffs? But St. Louis is in a situation we want to get in the playoffs. You don't want to lose out on that opportunity because you gave a young opportunity to a player who may not have been ready in that moment. So I think he's better to suit it on the wing to start than he would be at center, but he will eventually. I think he'd be a fantastic center moving forward.
Dave, one more just on the prospects. Who else stood out to you in terms of Blues players? I know Stansel with Czechia was really good. Stenberg with Sweden. Was there anybody else that really popped out to you?
I'd say Stansel in Czechia. Stenberg was good, but he was. I didn't see his finish. He controlled play a lot by handling the puck. But Stansel scored goals. I think he kind of stepped up into a role that, he's on the number one line, and they kind of had two lines in Czechia, and he was scoring goals, big goals, and he was going to the net hard. I thought he played extremely well. In big moments, which is what you're looking for. You want players to be their best at the biggest moments. And Stenberg was there, but I just didn't see. I was probably expecting more goals out of Otto Stenberg. I saw both Sweden, Czechia a lot, and Slovakia. And I'd say Stansel to me stood out more.
Dave, final one, and then we'll get you out of here on this. Just bigger picture with the Blues right now. You mentioned they're kind of a team that is trying to push themselves into the playoffs. Right now, the Western Conference seemingly is wide open for that final wild card spot. But where do you feel like this Blues team is at right now?
Right where they're at. I mean, it's you're kind of sitting on the fence. They'll show you a great glimpse of a great play, and then there's some average play and inconsistency, and it's going to be tough to move up when you're playing like that. I mean, this team has got to get on a run. It's a very tough division to start with, let alone the conference. And for them in the Central Division to start moving up and to make start catching anybody, I don't know if they're going to get to the Colorados, if they're going to be able to jump that 10-point swing. So it's just get the consistency going. I mean, you look at I keep looking and thinking, wow, there's teams at 500 who are in the playoffs. Like, that doesn't happen halfway through the year right now. Normally at the end of the year, you're battling 95 to 100 points to be in the playoffs. That's 13 to 15 games above 500. Well, we're halfway through the season, and teams are 500, one game over, and they're sitting in a playoff spot. And that's where St. Louis is. You're right there at 500. Are they going to need to only be 5 games over 500 to get in the playoffs this year? And if they are, they're still going to need to get on a run. So, I still don't know if the consistency is going to be there, top to bottom, and as a team, and that's going to be the issue. And whoever does it out of the group and the teams that are battling for the wild card spots, are they going to be able to get in there? Vancouver lost a tough one yesterday, but that's a team you got to be figuring you're catching. That's the team you got to catch. It's like, all right, they're the closest. They're the team that we got to catch. Them, Calgary, Utah. I think Utah's going to get better. Any of those 4 teams or 5 teams with St. Louis, someone gets on a run, you put 6 or 7 together, you go out and get 5 wins and 7, that might be enough to carry you through the way the season seems to be running along. Because 2 games over 500 is, you might end up 5 or 6 over 500. That might be enough to get you in the playoffs.
Dave, from your experience, how tough is it to string that long of a win streak together in the NHL?
Well, I think it's a little easier in today's game, all depending on your scheduling, because there are some teams, you have to beat the teams you're supposed to beat. I watched that Colorado Chicago game on TNT, and Mrazek played great, but I'm thinking this is a game Colorado's got to win if they want to move up, and they don't. And that's the type of thing for St. Louis. These are games that we're expected to win. We're higher in the standing. You've got to win those, and you'll run into games. You'll run into a situation like tonight's game. You got to win tonight. You can't make the playoffs and lose the teams below you in the standings. That's at this point of the year. Like, if we're going to get in the playoffs, we have to beat the teams we're supposed to beat, and this is a game that you're supposed to win. So you get a run where you've got Anaheim, you get Chicago, you might find a Buffalo or one of the weaker teams. You might get that run of 7, 8 games. You've got to win all of those games and then chip away at the teams that you're even or above. So I think it can be done a little bit easier depending on scheduling, because every team seems to have that one lull in their schedule where it's like, well, we're playing a group of non-playoff teams from last season. This is where we got to make hay. Not that it's easy to win 5 in a row, but I think the opportunity is probably there more than it would be in the past.
Dave Reid is a 2-time Stanley Cup winner. You can see him on NHL Network. That's where he was an analyst for their coverage of the World Juniors. We appreciate his time as always. Hey, Dave, all the best to you and the family, man. We'll talk with you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave.
That's Dave Reid. Appreciate his time as always. He joined us here on 101 ESPN. Alex, as he was talking about Dvorsky, his role, what he thinks he can be, what immediately he can be for this team, all I could think about, and I'm curious if T-Bone went to the same place, was Michael Granlund makes all the sense in the world for this team. All the sense in the world. Because if you have Thomas, Schenn, Granlund going down the middle, and for people that aren't familiar, Michael Granlund is a center right now for the San Jose Sharks. He's a 15-year NHL veteran. He's 32 years old. He's been in the league forever. He's a consistent 50-ish point producer, a really solid middle 6 center for a team, and he's playing pretty well right now for a pretty bad San Jose Sharks team. If you have Thomas, Schenn, Granlund down the middle, Holloway, Dvorsky, and Neighbors on one side, and Buch, Kyrou, and Saad on the other, you're in a pretty good spot. That could be a contending type of lineup going down the stretch. And I also, as he was talking about the potential of having Dvorsky on a wing and then masquerading as a center at times, him and Schenn being next to each other makes all the sense in the world.
And that's kind of what I was thinking of. Like, me personally, I'm not a big fan of Mikael Granlund. I don't think it fits, but honestly, it's a centerman, and right now you might be needing that. But my thought process there is you're going to be looking for a third-line center, because if Dvorsky's not there, and you heard Dave mention, and I agree, don't put him on the third line. Third line's not going to be getting a lot of ice time. You need him to play. When Dvorsky is ready, you put Dylan Holloway up there with Robert Thomas and Pavel Buchnevich.
Bingo.
And Dalibor Dvorsky goes to the wing to play with Jordan Kyrou and Braden Schenn.
Yep.
And now you're talking about a top 6 where he's getting playing time. He's taking an occasional face-off here and there, but he doesn't have to deal with all of the responsibility of being down the middle in a second-line role. And in that sense, now you're pushing other guys down to the third-line role. You're looking for a third-line center for the now. And then by next year, maybe. I think if you want Granlund beyond the season, you're going to have to, one, pay a hefty price to get him.
But you don't need him beyond the season.
Well, I think you
Just
might need
pay
him
for-
next year. If they don't think he's ready, it's probably not going to be till the middle of next year to where you feel like Dalibor Dvorsky's ready to take on that second line role.
But I can deal with that when we get to the offseason.
Maybe.
Like, I can find a third line center in free agency for a few $1,000,000 if I really need to go that path. Like, they could go get next year's version of Radek Faksa, right?
Yeah.
Whoever that is going to be, or a slightly upgraded version of Radek Faksa. But for this year, Granlund makes some sense.
Me personally, and this isn't just the St. Louis Ties, I would go the Trent Frederic route. Because I don't think he's going to cost you as much as Mikael Granlund's going to cost you, because Frederic doesn't have the offensive upside to him. Teams are going to want Mikael Granlund because he's got the offense and the ability to play the two-way style. And if I'm looking
Frederic just doesn't win faceoffs, man.
I get it, but if you look at him when he was center with Jim Montgomery, he did win faceoffs.
He was 45%
that first season. No, the first season with Jim Montgomery.
He didn't play center, really. His faceoff
I thought he was at
percentage
like
by
50%.
year, 39, 33, 45, 44. That's not a guy that I want playing as a third line center for me.
But it's just for one season.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, now you got him as a winger for you that does match the identity of a third line with a Braden Shen.
I'm certainly not paying him. And I
think he's going to be cheaper than Granlund, though, because of the offensive upside.
You talking about money-wise?
Money-wise. And trade equity.
I'm not worried about the money because I'm not signing either of them. I'll just get them for the rest of this season. I'll do what they should have done, in my opinion, with Nick Leddy. Play it out for the rest of this year. Let's see what it looks like. And then you can decide on the offseason. But my plan would not be that they're coming back next season. My plan would be, hey, you're going to help us try to get into the postseason, and then we'll kind of see how things work from there.
You just got to ask yourself, are you okay giving up the first-round pick?
You think that's what it's going to take?
Well, you don't have a second or a third-round pick this year, and teams are going to offer up second and third-round picks this year. So if you want to put yourself above the top...
You've also got prospects that you can play with, though, this offseason.
But do you think Doug's going to trade them?
This year.
Maybe. I don't think he would. If we're talking like guys that don't really play into the future, I could see that.
You said it the other day, think about all of the prospects that he traded away as a part of the last build. When they started, like, okay, we've accumulated this talent, now it's time for us to use it to be able to make our NHL level roster the best version possible.
But that was that was going out to get Ryan O'Reilly and Justin Falk. And I just, again, it might just be me being downer or more down on Mikael Granlund. I just don't know if he fits into it, but I also think he's going to be one of those competition acquisitions at the deadline that I don't know if the Blues are going to have the assets or should give up the assets to get into that.
Let me say this another way. Boston's in third place in their division right now. I'm not sure they're trading.
Boston's also lost 8 of their last 10.
Totally with you, and it speaks to how bad that conference is right now, especially their division, that they can lose 8 of their last 10 games, including each of their last 5, and they're still in third place in their division. And it really becomes a question of, like, do you think that's going to continue? I don't think they're going to continue to be one of the worst teams in the league. If they do, yeah, they're probably going to be sellers at the deadline, but it's entirely possible they decide to add at the deadline. Like, they're in the conversation. All of their beat writers are saying this team needs to be in on Elias Pettersson.
Which
we'll see.
That's
like
a
that
joke.
I wouldn't expect that to be the case, but I think it's more likely they make a move to bolster their roster than it is that they make a move to remove from the roster. And maybe Frederic is a part of that, to be able to add to it. And so instead of trading him for a prospect, they trade Frederic the way that we've talked about with potentially Zach Bolduc, where we're trading this guy to improve where we're at right now. Or maybe it's multiple moves, and they trade Frederic for a prospect, and then they flip that prospect for a guy. I don't know. But the reason I bring up Granlund is not because I'm in love with the player so much as it is he's available. Yeah. We know he's for sure... He's very likely to be available. They're the second worst team in the Western Conference. He's on an expiring deal. This is classic. We're moving this guy at the deadline type of an asset. So that's why I bring him up. I'm open to other options. As third,
well, that's the problem, though. There's just not a whole lot of options in terms of centermen that realistically you could acquire.
He's Alex Ferrario. That is Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Believe It or Not here on 101 ESPN.
Sing it, boys. Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I never thought I could feel so
free, flying away on a wing and a prayer. Who could it be?
Believe it or not, it's just me.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Believe It or Not. You guys give us a scenario. We will tell you if we are believing it or not here on a 101 ESPN. We did just get a breaking news report in the college football world. Georgia has been eliminated from the college football playoff, and now their quarterback is headed to the transfer portal. There were previously reports that Carson Beck would decide to declare for the NFL draft. I'm guessing this is probably a more lucrative option for him and, frankly, a smarter option for him. I don't think he was going to be a first-round pick in the upcoming draft. He did not play well enough for that this year. So he's entering the transfer portal. Guys, believe it or not, Carson Beck will be a Miami Duck next year. Miami Hurricane.
I was going to say, what?
They're
Is there another
Oregon,
college?
Miami kind of reuniting and becoming
in my
one
head,
school?
I was thinking about their mascot, which is a duck, but they're the Hurricanes, so I apologize. Take two. Carson Beck will be a Miami Hurricane next year. Believe it or not, Alex.
I was going to say not believe it until you told me who he was dating, and yes, now I will believe it.
Yeah, I'm going to believe it too, because my first thought was Oregon originally.
Mine too.
I thought that's why you had Duck stuck in your head until you told me that he's dating one of the, what are their names again?
The Cavender twins.
Cavender twins at Miami, the basketball players. I believe this. He's going to end up going to Miami.
You are allowed to Google this on your work computer. I wasn't sure. I thought BK was setting me up. You are allowed to Google that on your work computer.
Yeah, he is reportedly dating Hannah Cavender, who is a basketball player at Miami. I think they took a sabbatical year last year, and then now they're back with Miami, from what I understand. So, yeah, I think he will end up at Miami. That would be my guess right now. Oregon makes some sense. I don't know where else he would logically go. I guess maybe Penn State, depending on what happens with Drew Aller. I suppose that could be an option for him as well. But there have been a bunch of reports that
Alabama.
That's a good one.
Going to the draft.
Potentially multiple guys that are playing in the college football playoff this year, the 12-team playoff, that could end up transferring. Talking about quarterbacks, starting quarterbacks. Quinn Ewers could be another that ends up potentially going to the portal. He's the one that I would guess to Oregon. That would be my guess on
That
him.
makes sense.
Alex, what do you got for us today?
Guys, believe it or not, Cam Fowler finishes this season with the Blues with the most points amongst defensemen.
Who was it?
Cam Fowler.
Finishes with the most
points among defensemen on the Blues.
Are you talking about during his time with the Blues, or over the course of his regular season?
Well, he only had, time with the Blues.
Okay.
Because he only had 4 assists with Anaheim, but still worth the 13 points. But, we'll say just with the Blues. He's got 9 points right now.
That's interesting. So Parayko's at 23, so he'd have to make up 14 points over the next 40 games.
Remember, he's on the power play.
I'll say forget it. I think Parayko ends up leading this team in points among their defensemen, which is not something I would have anticipated before the season, but he's having one hell of a season.
You should start listening to your partner when he says this guy's pretty good.
Thanks, man. Right. I have been trying to convince him on stuff for a long time now.
You shut your dirty mouth.
I will not believe it because I agree. I think it's going to be Parayko. I mean, you mentioned Fowler on the power play. I didn't want to say it, but the power play's not that good, so I don't know how much helpful that's going to be.
I don't know why you didn't want to say it. I mean, legitimately, it is not that good.
I'm not going to believe it. If they had an elite power play, like they were a top 10 power play, I could see how he catches up, but they're not that. They're a bottom 10 power play, so I'm not going to believe it.
Not for me. Not for me. I'll go with Colton Parayko.
Not for me. Not for me.
T-Bone?
Cool.
Guys, believe it or not, Doug Armstrong will trade this year's first-round pick at the trade deadline.
Not believe it. I think he trades it at the draft. I think that's when you see the big moves get made, and I think the first-round pick will be attached with a couple of players, and that's where the big move will happen by Doug Armstrong.
I'm going to say not as well. I think he'll use potentially future picks, like not in the 2025 draft, and I think more likely he uses prospects as his capital this year, or current NHL-level players. Brandon Saad could be somebody that ends up getting sent out, for example, for a pick that you could then flip at the deadline. Maybe Zach Bolduc is used as currency. Like if Zach Bolduc was traded for a draft pick, maybe he's valued as a second-round pick, and therefore he becomes your de facto second-round pick, so that way a team doesn't have to wait all of that time for that pick to be able to develop. I think he's actually more valuable than your typical second-round pick. So I think they have the amount of ammo that they need to go make a big move if they want to, even if it doesn't include their first-round pick. So I'm going to say not believe this one.
See, I'm going to believe this. My Army sensor's going off, and I think he's going to look at this. I mean,
Might need new batteries.
they've been clear that they want to get to the playoffs, and he's said publicly on multiple occasions it's no longer about asset accumulation. Well, then you don't necessarily need that first-round pick if you're no longer collecting assets. I could see where he convinces himself, we're going to move this first-round pick. Maybe it is to go out and get a Granlund to make it happen. I think he will move this year's first-round pick.
Why I would not want him to do that is it's the trade deadline, yes. And if you're in a playoff spot, okay. But if you're still kind of flirting around that 500, if I'm him, my team could go into the tank real quick, and that 15th overall pick could become a 6th overall pick. And I know you're not in the asset accumulation, but if you got a top 5 pick because your team just gets bad at the end of the season, that's not going to look good for Mikael Granlund.
I get that. I wonder, my Stillman sensors are going off now.
Stop it.
I wonder if it's a requirement to make the playoffs. And if it is, there may not be hey, we need to walk away from the deadline not adding anything. It may be, hey, ownership wants to be in the playoffs. We need to add and get to the playoffs, so let's go out and get a Granlund or somebody like that.
I will be very angry if they trade a first-round pick for Mikael Granlund.
I would be too. I wouldn't do that. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for believe it or not.
Or bet it.
Somebody on the text line said bet it or forget. I get it.
It's
They're
the same
similar
segment, guys.
It's different. It's totally different.
We just sing on this one.
All right, believe it or not, the Chicago Bears will trade for their next head coach. I'm not going to believe this.
No.
I think the only guys you would trade for are Mike Tomlin and Kevin O'Connell, neither of whom I believe will actually be traded this offseason. I'll give you a tinfoil theory on who they're going to hire as
Andy
their
Reid?
next head coach, though. No.
Trade for him. Makes sense.
He stinks.
Matt Nagy would be more likely than Andy Reid, neither of whom
you
are.
don't do that one.
They've
Don't
done
do
that
that
before.
again.
Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. Now, one of the reasons why he's from Chicago originally, which shouldn't matter, but I think sometimes does matter. It holds a little bit of a tiebreaker, if nothing
Especially
else.
for Chicago people.
No doubt. He's also, how do I say this?
Bad
More
at his
quirky?
job.
No, I think Todd Monken's really good at his job. I think it would be an inspired hire, honestly. He's more quirky. Like, I think the exact wrong thing that they could do is to hire somebody, Vikings, Brian Flores. I don't think that would be a good fit at all with Caleb Williams. And the way that those two operate as just humans,
Well, yeah.
I don't think that would be a good fit. I think Flores might be a good head coach somewhere. The Bears with Caleb Williams feels like a really bad fit for him. I think Monken might be the right kind of personality to go along with Caleb Williams. So that would be my pick for their next head coach. But believe it or not, guys, they trade for one.
Not believe it. I don't think there's anybody you're going to be able to trade for as a head coach. I think this is, especially if you're the Chicago Bears, I don't know if you want to put your assets towards a coach. Your assets need to be towards better players on your team to help protect Caleb Williams. So I'm not believing it.
Yeah, I'm not believing it either. We rarely see coaches get traded. Think about what happened for Sean Payton to technically be traded. He was in retirement or whatever it was. He stepped away from the team, and then he came back, and that's how he got traded. So, yeah, I'm not going to believe this.
Believe it or not, both number 1 seeds are eliminated in this year's NFL playoffs prior to the championship weekend. Chiefs and Lions both lose in the divisional round, believe it or not.
Not believe it. I'm not believing that the Chiefs lose that early. And frankly, I think I'm still backing the Detroit Lions in that run for the playoffs in the NFC. So I'm not believing this. I think both get to the championship game.
I'm not believing it. I've got the Lions on upset watch potentially in that next round. I don't for the Chiefs. I think the NFC's deeper. I think the Chiefs won't lose until they get to the AFC Championship game.
Yeah, Chiefs don't lose in the divisional round.
I mean, I hope they do.
In
Just
the
so I can
Mahomes
talk about
era,
it.
it's happened exactly 0 times. They always get to at least the championship game, and then most of the time get to the Super Bowl, and then most of the time win the Super Bowl. So I think that they will end up in championship weekend. I'm not believing this at all. I'd be very surprised if the Chiefs lose in the divisional round. That being said, Lions good. It would require a shootout and somebody outscoring them in that regard, but I think they could definitely lose in the divisional round this year. All right, with Alex and T-Bone on BK, the rewind is coming up in about 15 minutes. But next, what's the Cardinals' biggest mistake over the last 5 years? This is an article that went up on ESPN.com. They broke it down for every team in Major League Baseball. I'm curious your thoughts on this. The text line 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Cardinals' biggest mistake of the last 5 years coming up next year on 101 ESPN.
Tanner Hendricks and you with a Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Blues back in action tonight as they host the Anaheim Ducks. We'll have pregame coverage starting at 6 o'clock with Alex Ferrario and Joey Vitale. Then Joey will join Chris Kerber for Puck Drop at 7. Cardinals news today. The Cardinals reached a deal with Ryan Helsley to avoid arbitration as he settles at $8.2 million for 2025. But according to our Cardinals insider Katie Wu, the Cardinals did not reach a deal with outfielder Lars Nootbaar or starting pitcher Andre Pallante. So those two will head to arbitration. This portion update is brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
ESPN.com ranked the biggest mistakes that every organization in Major League Baseball has made since the 2020 season, Alex. And for the Cardinals, their mistake was trading Randy Arozarena to the Tampa Bay Rays. That was in January of 2020. So it just made the cut.
Pretty big one.
Said some of the Cardinals' struggles over the past 2 seasons can be traced back to the 2019-20 offseason. First, they sent Adolis Garcia to the Rangers for cash consideration, and then they traded Arozarena to the Rays with pitching prospect Matthew Liberatore as the primary return. The Cardinals outfielders over the last 5 seasons have ranked 25th in Major League Baseball in OPS. So it hasn't gone particularly according to plan.
I'd say that's a winner.
I would say that is the majority opinion. If you look back since 2020, what's the biggest mistake that the Cardinals have made? Trading Randy A represents a lot of their failures. It's a failure of not giving him the opportunity that I believe most think he deserved, not having the proper evaluation of a player, giving up on him for a player pitching-wise that you needed because you did not properly acquire pitching via the market. All of these things were represented in one trade. So I think you could do that. Say that was their biggest mistake. Makes a lot of sense to me. Alex, what would you go with for your nomination?
So mine is giving the contract extension to Miles Mikolas in 2020. That was the 5-year deal that they extended him. And I think that was coming off of a
3-year extension that he got on top of the 2-year deal that he had previously. Yeah.
And that was coming off of a bad 2019 season. And part of the reasoning with that is you put $68 million towards that, and now look 5 years later of where the Cardinals are at. Like, we're hemorrhaging money. We need to get rid of it. Man, 2020 offseason, you could have signed Robbie Ray to a 1-year deal for a rebound. 2021, you could have signed Kevin Gossman to a 1-year deal and done a rebound. They were so scared of not having quality pitching for a team that they were like, we've got all the young players, we need to fix our pitching, that they just locked up a dude who was good in 2018 and said he can repeat this. That to me was a massive mistake, secondarily to Randy Arozarena, because I think that was the biggest. But that Miles Mikolas contract was very bad.
All right, I might be going through the loophole here because mine's not a Major League Baseball decision that the St. Louis Cardinals made, and mine kind of spans over a couple of years. But think back to what the first press conference was at the end of the season. What was it about? It was about spending money on player development, and I think that was their biggest mistake in the last 5 years. You know, you can talk about the evaluation of Randy Arozarena. That one is completely fair. Some would say we won. We still have Libby. They don't have Randy A. But I look at
literally nobody would say that.
Yeah, we didn't win for that 4-year stretch where he was Babe Ruth.
I bet Mo might convince himself of that.
He absolutely will.
I think their biggest mistake was when they cut spending and quit trying to grow their minor league system by investing in modern technology. And I think that starts, you can circle 2020 when they cut out some of their roaming instructors with like Chris Carpenter being taken off of the books. They no longer have him. They let go of Ryan Ludwig. Now, Ryan Ludwig, of course, back with the organization. But that's the one for me. Because you think back from that 2020 year, you can go all the way through, hey, 2020, they end up... or 2021, they end up rushing some of their pitching prospects. They end up getting set back behind because they really struggle at the AAA level. Then they have no pitching. They are still trying to work and develop starting pitching. They might have it now with Andre Pallante because it's 5 years from that 2020 mark that we're talking about. You also look at their position players. Their position players keep yo-yoing back and forth, and we have to have the conversation of, is that development from the minor leagues. Are these guys ready by the time they get up here to the major leagues? So for me, it's not a roster decision. It's a, hey, they cut spending. They quit trying to continue to advance their analytical approach at the minor league level. For me, that is where their biggest mistake was in the last 5 years.
Okay, so I think both of those are really good ones. I would also add, like, the decision on Ozuna was a weird one at the time. An understandable one at the time that has come back to just be a horrific decision. There are some that you can look back in retrospect and say that was a really bad choice. Like Waino's last year. Honestly, there was other ways to spend $15 million on that contract that offseason. We talked about it. Now, we got shouted down, but we talked about, hey, would you rather have Charlie Morton or Adam Wainwright? What they did was totally understandable. This is a franchise legend. You got to bring him back. But $15 million... it was a lot of money to spend on Adam Wainwright at that point in his career, but it was basically a going away present for him. So I get it. I'm going to go back to one that maybe it's not the worst decision that they've made over the last 5 years, but it represents, again, kind of similar to that deal where they traded Randy Arozarena, a lot of the decision-making processes that have gone awry. So let's go back to the 2022 offseason. Going into that 2022 season where they had a really good year. They had Albert Pujols, prime versions, MVP versions of Goldie and Arenado that year, and their rotation was a mess. And so at the deadline, they ended up having to acquire Quintana and Jordan Montgomery. Well, you look at the starting pitching market that offseason, which the Cardinals did dip into. They ended up signing that offseason a contract that they are now trying to get rid of in Steven Matz. Here are some of the pitchers that were available to sign in free agency that offseason. Marcus Stroman, Carlos Rodon, Robbie Ray, that was prior to him breaking down the way that he has. Kevin Gossman was available that offseason. You could have gone out there and had John Gray, who performed pretty well on that deal. Alex Wood was one of them. Yusei Kikuchi was another. Alex Cobb was another. Eduardo Rodriguez was another. Andrew Heaney, Tyler Anderson, Michael Wacha. All of these guys have not only outperformed what you have been able to get out of Steven Matz, most of them were shorter contracts.
I say most of them have signed a second contract.
And the ones that were bigger for the most part, like you look at the top of the market, for example, and you could have gone out and acquired Kevin Gossman, 5 years, $110 million. That's before this market exploded the way that it has over the last few years. I think there were so many lessons that were learned potentially in that market for free agency, starting pitching wise, that since then the Cardinals have, I think, learned. You either go to the top of the market and get the really good dudes, or you go short term, man. Giving a 4-year deal to the mid-tier market is the worst thing you can do in the starting pitching market. And that is exactly what the Cardinals locked themselves into with Steven Matz. So I think it represents a lot of what the Cardinals have had as a huge problem in recent seasons, not valuing the top of the pitching market enough and overvaluing the mid-tier market. It speaks to what Alex was talking about with Miles Mikolas as well, with that 3-year extension, $18 million. He wasn't getting more than that in the open market, so why lock yourself in? Why not just play this thing year to year? That's something that I would point to as one of the worst decisions, and it represents a bigger problem over the last 5 years.
When I had Miles Mikolas, that's kind of the trickle-down effect. The Miles Mikolas led to, well, Miles wasn't that great for us, so now we got to go out there and find another pitcher, and now you're throwing more money at a problem that you could have just gone 1-year deals with if you knew how to properly evaluate the pitchers that were out there.
And it's all come down to what we hope that they get answers on this year, right? Is they finally develop 2 guys that fit this market. Palante, McGreevy, maybe a Gordon Graceffo, maybe Quinn Matthews doesn't become a 1 or 2, but if he's a number 3, guess what? That's a win for the St. Louis Cardinals, because if you develop starting pitching, you don't have to give Mikolas the deal. You don't have to go to free agency and give Steven Matz the deal, and now you're both looking at those contracts going, oh boy, these things really did not age well.
Good thing you went to arbitration with Andre Palante. That'll be really successful in terms of evaluating talent.
Let's get to a few of these from the text line, from the 217, and this is representative of a number of texts that we've had. The Schilt firing is another one that people are pointing to as one of the worst decisions that the Cardinals have made over the last 5 years. Waino last season is another one. Somebody else said, this is an interesting one. In retrospect, I think the Arenado trade was probably not a good move, even though it wasn't necessarily a bad trade. I would also add signing Wilson Contreras to this list probably didn't help us the way that they thought. It might end up actually hurting them because of the salary and the potential for the no trade clause. From the 618, guys, I think not trading Carlson and the package that it would have required for Juan Soto is also something that I would throw into the mix as well. That was one of the worst moves that they decided not to make at that point in time.
I disagree with that one. Because it wasn't just Carlson, it was Walker and Wynn. Like there were a lot of guys that you're relying on for the future, and Gorman. Like you were relying on a lot of the future in that trade for Juan Soto, and who knows if he was even here.
I think that part is fair because they weren't going to give him his contract.
They would have probably traded him, and then it would have been about, do you trust them to get the prospects in return?
And look at what Washington got back. So.
Washington got a good haul, but also Padres got a really good haul.
Oh, yeah, Padres,
in that
sorry.
recent trade. I mean, this is the year that determines if they made that mistake or not.
Agreed.
Because if Walker doesn't even, like I said yesterday, it's about stabilizing for Walker. It's about stabilizing for Gorman. Those guys don't stabilize, and you're telling me that in hindsight, and look, it is hindsight, the package was Carlson, who may not even be in the big leagues next year, Walker, who may not even develop to be an average player, Gorman, who has too many strikeout problems to be a league average player, and then Mason Wynn, who's a really good shortstop. That would have been a heck of a trade for the St. Louis Cardinals at that time to acquire that player. This is the year that determines if they were right or not about holding on to those guys.
I also disagree with the Arenado one. At the time, I don't think that was a bad trade. The problem for the Cardinals...
They're talking about hindsight 2020.
Yeah, but the problem for the Cardinals was you didn't capitalize on it. Somebody else brought up one, and this will be interesting because it's BK's guy. Not trading for Zach Wheeler when you could have traded Harrison Bader for him.
I think that was before 2020. I think that was like 2018, if I'm not mistaken.
No, his first year with Philly was 2020.
So, yeah, it would have been
So the
before,
2019-2020 offseason.
It would have been the Mets. Because it was that year that he was with the Mets at the deadline, I believe. And they weren't planning to re-sign him. So you would have
traded him at the deadline? I thought they traded him in the offseason.
I think they traded him at the... Was it the deadline?
No, it was in the offseason because 2020 was his first full year with Philly. He didn't play with Philly in 2019.
Okay, then yeah, it would have been one offseason or 1 year that he would have been here because then he signed a contract extension with Philly. If I'm remembering this correctly, I remember he had like 1 year left on his deal. The Cardinals probably weren't going to re-up him for the money that he was likely to get via the free agent market. So you were trading all of Bader's deal for 1 year of Wheeler, and I think that gets overlooked in the discussion about Wheeler. But yeah, like that looking back on it, huge mistake. You could have had Zach Wheeler. He was amazing.
3 years, $126 million. So what is that? $42 million a year? Is that what that is?
It was a 5-year deal, no?
Oh, was
it?
it?
5 years. Yeah.
Oh, maybe. Did they just re-sign him to an extension then?
I think they did.
Oh, yeah. So that's what it was. Yeah, it was a 3-year extension. So what did he get? 5 years, $23 million.
Per year.
Per year. So going back to it, the 3-year contract extension for Miles Mikolas, where it's $18 million, 5 more mil.
We're getting kind of the same thing.
And Mikolas, the following year,
right,
Steven Matz.
The BK and Ferrario Rewind coming up next here on 101 ESPN. Hey, if you missed anything from today's show, be sure to check it out on the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Shaver Door Company.
The 101 ESPN app is free to use. It is super easy to use as well, and it is presented by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers. You guys can always check out the show during and after on YouTube. YouTube.com/101ESPN STL is where you can go to find it. The studio cams are powered by the Air Alliance team. Alex, we got just another minute or so here on the show today. Blues back in action this evening. They are going with Hofer in net for them tonight. What do you make of the decision? You think it's the right one?
I do. I think you don't want Hofer playing against the Columbus Blue Jackets on Saturday, and right now neither goaltender took it, so you put Hofer in this one. Hofer's got like a .942 save percentage against the Anaheim Ducks, so this is the right move. Columbus and then Calgary will be Bennington, and then Hofer gets that other one against Calgary.
Notre Dame versus Penn State tonight in the college football playoff semifinal. Who you guys got?
I'm going with Penn State with the win.
Notre Dame.
I'm going Penn State as well. Alex didn't know what I was asking until after T-Bone said that he was going with Penn State. So we'll see how that one ends up going.
I still would have said Notre Dame.
I'm VK. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow at 11 a.m. The Fast Lane's coming up next here on 101 ESPN.